About a month after I turned 30 years old, I started acting in strange ways. I stopped leaving my room. I was overly emotional. I stopped functioning in the outside world and left my job at the time. My mother, who noticed this behavior and saw a pattern with the things I've experienced before, directed me, basically like forced me to go to this government mental health clinic here in Ohio. And it was there where I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder type 1. Of course, this wasn't the first manifestation of this. It was just the latest chapter, but it has been misdiagnosed before. And here I was at the age of 30 with a label for what has been going on with me for a long time. This has been over 2 years ago at this point, well over 2 years ago. And since then I have been going for repeated therapy sessions, and I have been consistently medicated for these 2 years. So what does bipolar disorder mean in the context of my life? Well, in order to kind of illuminate that for you, I will have to go into a very quick detour into the history of religion in Russia. You see, currently, there are certain religions that have a preferred status in Russia. They have certain privileges that missionaries or Mormons or whoever, any newcomers to Russia, don't have. And this is because they have been present in Russia for centuries. They are the historical religions, the traditional religions of the Russian Federation. So those include a lot of indigenous religions of small tribes and small groups of people in Russia, paganism, polytheism. This, of course, includes the Russian Orthodox Church. It includes Islam, Judaism is another one. And the one you might not expect there is Buddhism. That's right. There are certain territories within Russia, certain ethnic groups who practice Tibetan Buddhism. Those involves the Buryats, the Kalmyks, and the Tuva. I don't know, it's ethnicity so small I don't even know how to pronounce their republic. Well, anyway, here they are, the Buddhists of the Russian Federation. These are the tribes, the Buryats and the Kalmyks, of the Mongols who have migrated into Russia or whose territories were absorbed into Russia. And one of the most distinguished Russian Buddhists, one of the most distinguished members of the Russian Buddhist Sangha, has been Agvan Dorjev. Agvan Dorjev has been born in the middle of the 19th century, and he passed away in 1938. And by any definition, he has lived an extraordinary life. He traveled from the Russian Empire all the way to Tibet. He has achieved a great reputation as a scholar in the Tibetan monasteries and became a confidant of the Dalai Lama. He has built a Buddhist temple, the first of its kind, in the capital of the Russian Empire at the time, St. Petersburg. And he has actually met Tsar Nicholas II. And the reason he gained access to the Tsar is because Tibet was of potential strategic significance to the Russian Empire in its geopolitical conflict with Great Britain, the Great Game. And in fact, partly because of their suspicions of Agvan Dorjev, the British Empire actually ended up invading Tibet at the beginning of the 20th century. He has signed a treaty between Tibet and Mongolia on behalf of the Dalai Lama, although this is disputed, that effectively mutually recognized both countries. Tibet recognized Mongolia as independent, and Mongolia recognized Tibet as an independent country. He returned to Russia, to the Russian Empire, which became the Soviet Union. He tried to cooperate with the new communist regime, but was placed under suspicion, was arrested, and died in custody. And ever since I have learned about this extraordinary person, ever since I studied his life, I felt an extremely personal connection with him. A very personal connection. And the reason I feel such a personal connection with him is because I am Agvan Dorjev. for 2 manic periods in my life, in the same way that you're certain about the name of the girl or boy you first kissed, in the same way that you know the PIN code to your ATM card, in the same way that you know the names of your first pets, in the same way I believed that I was a realized being capable of traveling through space and time at my own will, reincarnating in the way that I want to. I believe that I sincerely believe that I chose the time and place of my birth and chose my parents. I believe that my previous reincarnation was Agvan Dorjev, and that our mind stream was one, and that I was here to complete his mission. I distinctly remember sitting in my car in 2014. I was working as a driver at the time, transporting people to their doctor's appointments. And I was sitting during a break and looking around at people walking around me and cars passing by. And I had a sense of dread. I had a sense of a kind of malaise. I thought about all the horror, all the genocides, all the mass murders. And I asked myself whether I want to reincarnate in this world one more time, whether I want to return to this horrible world. And then as I was looking around at the people around me, I remembered my bodhisattva vow, the vow of a semi-enlightened being that proclaims that it will not achieve enlightenment until every single sentient being is liberated, from the mosquito to the president of Uganda. And I reaffirmed that vow. As much as I didn't want to return to this world, reincarnate, I knew that I had to, for the sake of all living beings. And this was an incredible moment for me. It was a powerful moment, a powerful affirmation of who I was. However, if you were to backtrack 3 years from 2014, during the last time mania has swirled my spirit into convincing itself that I was the reincarnation of Lama Agvan Dorjev, my thoughts for the future at that time were in no way less grandiose. That's right, I was going to become the president of Russia. I would be carried by my good deeds, my positive karma, and the Buddhist practice from previous lifetimes. I would be carried straight into the Kremlin. I would have to be tough in my first term. There's a lot of corruption, and I would have to get things dirty to, improve the well-being of the country and the world. But eventually I would usher a new age of democracy in Russia by rewriting the constitution, certain aspects of it I have stored in my head at the time. And then of course my most important mission was being a secret Buddhist who would nevertheless create a Tibetan republic, a Tibetan autonomous region within Russia, where Tibetan would be the official language along with Russian, and where Tibetan culture and religion could be preserved. After all, Russia has a lot of space. In a conventional sense, ever since my late teens until I turned 30 and got my diagnosis, although all those years were lost, they were wasted. I became effectively a hermit who interacted very little with the outside world. I lived between the meaning highs of mania and the kind of a melancholy fog of depression where I wanted to reconnect with those manic highs. I was effectively looking for the truth, looking for the ultimate truth, searching for myself, searching for meaning, literally for 12 years of my life. And then I was informed that the whole thing were an assembly of symptoms of a mental illness. In 3 months and a few days, I will be 33 years old. I have lived here where I am filming right now in my mother's house for the past 4 years. My credit score is entirely ruined by one period of manic spending. In fact, I'm unable to get any kind of a loan, no car, no anything. I had 2 severe clinical depressions. One lasted for around 9 months, and another one lasted for a year and a few months. Now, during those times, I was hardly able to leave the room. I had to be prompted and ordered to do so by my mother. I was unable to work. I didn't communicate with anybody. It's hard for me to even remember what happened during that time span because of the monotony of dread. So these are effectively 2 years lost, where I was entirely out of commission. And the other thing with all of these adventures, I never had a normal, long-term relationship with a woman. It's just it didn't happen. I had other preoccupations like saving all sentient beings, and then during periods of depression, severe and mild, or I should say milder, I guess. Even maybe I wanted to, but was not able to acquire it. And yet, if you were to ask me a simple question, if I could press a button and get rid of my bipolar disorder, which of course continues to persist today, even though it has been subdued by medication. In fact, just a few days ago, I was somewhat contemplating in the back of my mind starting a religious group, a Buddhist religious group, even though I knew it was goofy, but the old flames were burning there, even though combined with medication, I knew they were ridiculous. Anyway, if I had a simple choice to get rid of this illness, this mental illness, would I do it? And I don't have an answer to that. I don't have a definitive answer to that at all. I do not have a definitive no. And the reason for that is that bipolar disorder isn't just something that happens to you. Sure, there are severe depressions and severe manias, but there are milder depressions and milder manias, and there is just living in the aftermath of those, having those define your life. And in this case, bipolar disorder is your life. It is who you are. Bipolar disorder is my organic way of being in the world. I have been bipolar since my late teens, since I became somewhat of an adult, since I have left my childhood. It has been there, and it's hard to let go because I'm not sure what's going to remain. Once that basic rhythm of life that beats in me, a kind of a crazy and self-destructive rhythm, I don't know what would be left behind. I don't know who I am without it. There is a great book by a Russian author who I like a lot, Viktor Pelevin, and it's called Empire Roman numeral, or Empire V. It describes a situation where a young Russian wakes up one day and he is informed that he is now a vampire. But what it means within the context of that book is that there is almost like a parasite with fangs that now lives within him, but never explicitly communicates with him. He gives this parasite gives him special powers, an extension of life, and an ability to be a part of the secret society and all of this. I mean, it's described much better than I'm doing now. But essentially, throughout the whole book, he's wrestling with the question of where the vampire ends and he begins, because the communication is always subtle. It's hardly there. He's not sure if his will is being subdued. And in the same way, the parasite of bipolar disorder, even though it does try to kill you, it also, when it wishes to, when the moons align, it gives you a sublime high. It gives you a heightened sense of meaning. And even if all of this is surrounded by bullshit and delusions and ridiculous, grandiose fantasies and strolls through the Kremlin, Just like that, Leonard Cohen song, there is a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in. And when that light of meaning gets in through those delusions, through everything else, it is a powerful experience, and I can't compare it with anything else. It is a kind of a spiritual experience. And as I look back at those years in the fog, there are kind of lights and mystery in that fog. There is an embrace of life in that fog that most people have not experienced. And I guess this is what this video is about. It is about the story of how your mood fluctuations define who you are over time. And not just through these rare instances of total psychosis where I was completely deluded, but through milder variations. They take you off the path, in a sense, and at times kind of try to kill you or destroy your life. But at other times it really gives you something that's hard to put into words. When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I read this book, the Bipolar Guidebook or something, the Guide to Bipolar Disorder. And in the foreword to the book, the author, a psychiatrist with a lot of experience treating people with bipolar, he listed 3 common interests of people with bipolar disorder. And it was politics, writing, and finance. These are where the winds carried them. And in my case, check this out, I got a degree in political science in college, and I had ideas, grandiose ideas associated with that. I sent out a essay to the New Yorker when I was 19. I mean, we can guess what inspired that boost of confidence, and I later had a blog. And as for finance, I did, at one point in my life, dedicate a lot of energy to trying to get a job at a hedge fund, even though I was not qualified at all. So in this book in this video, I will present you with kind of the awakening of this within me. And then the progression, how it kind of, from a little spark, it kind of consumed me and defined me. And I will go through first talking about what bipolar disorder actually is. Then I will give you a little bit of my family history of mental illness. I will present you with my childhood and then basically accelerate upon my late teen years when the things started to develop. This is going to be a very long video, and I realize that most people who are watching it now aren't going to finish it, and I'm completely fine with it. There are a lot of kind of sob stories to compete with mine. Nevertheless, I also am not fucking interested in anybody telling me to make it snappy. Zero interest in that. I mean, if you want to finish this thing, you would have to think about it as an audiobook or something. Because I'm not interested in turning this channel into a bipolar channel, and I'm fine with never talking about this again. Just wanted to get it out of my system this one time. However, if you are interested in the human psyche, if you are interested in mental illness, if you are interested in, I guess, the question of free will or something, then this video could very well be worth your time. Of course, words like mania and melancholia come to us from ancient Greece, come to us from antiquity. However, there were certain classical physicians who not only identified those things as separate entities, but have connected themselves into basically a pretty accurate outline of bipolar disorder. One of the most prominent of these has been Aretius of Cappadocia. He actually has provided symptomology of many diseases like diabetes and celiac disease, heart diseases, and others, but he also had a pretty good diagnostic, or at least a good outline of the symptoms of bipolar disorder, not only noting that these people have experienced low and high moods within the context of one illness, but also outlined some symptoms of mania, like being hypersexual and also spending a lot of money. These Greek and Roman physicians, many of them also realized that the origin of mental illnesses is in the brain. So they were doing pretty well. There were a lot of activities they undertook between fucking little boys. Nevertheless, as the history of the West progressed or regressed, is more like it, we know how the mentally ill were treated, and there was no real need specifically to describe it. I mean, treatments were pretty horrible. People were confined to insane asylum, and with bipolar disorder, very often a person may appear insane, and you could say could be insane and psychotic for a manic period, however it ends. And I'm sure many of these people were considered just permanently insane, put into an insane asylum where, in a self-fulfilling prophecy, they actually became permanently deranged or something like that, just as a consequences of being in that environment where a normal person, many of them would go insane as well. In fact, receiving a lot of medical care before the 20th century was a very iffy proposition. A lot of names of diseases really didn't mean much. They were just applied willy-nilly. Treatments were often improvised. The science that we know today, the medical science we know today, really didn't exist. But this specifically applied to psychiatry. I mean, their kind of words, any kind of symptoms or names of diseases really meant very little. There was little consistency and really little realistic prospect of treatment, and the symptomatic cluster of bipolar disorder has been lost. That is to say, there was no equivalent disease or that people would be diagnosed with, even though the themes of mania and melancholia as being the foundation of mental illness remained. In fact, there were insane asylums where any visitor would be greeted by two huge statues of mania and melancholia. It was only in the middle of the 19th century where two French physicians have outlined bipolar disorder. Then toward the end of the 19th century, a German physician gave it the name of the manic depressive illness that it had until it was changed in the 20th century. Now, if you were around the beginning of the 20th century, the options as far as treatment of mental illness were not that great. One, of course, was a lobotomy, which was a big bummer. The other one was for the ladies. Now, ladies were in a sense in luck, I guess, because any mental illness in women was diagnosed as hysteria. And we know how to treat hysteria, don't we? Of course, it's clitoral stimulation. So a lady would go to their doctor, and he or the nurse would stimulate their clitoris until the point of orgasm. You might say that this is a strange thing to undertake at the beginning of the 20th century with all the moral standards at the time. Well, you see, women are completely asexual. And so therefore somehow creating an orgasm was not a big deal. It's not a big deal for medicinal purposes. I guess a lot of physicians were tired of clitoral stimulation. I mean, it's a demanding job. And so this was one of the reasons why the vibrator was invented, if not the reason. And then here comes Sigmund Freud with his theories, psychoanalysis. The idea that our conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg. And underneath this iceberg are these crazy desires, a tangle of libido that originated in your childhood. And so people, mentally ill people with bipolar disorder would go there and they would talk with a psychoanalyst for an hour, talking about their secret desires and their dreams, etc. And naturally, this didn't work. In fact, today most people consider this to be utter bullshit, unless you're Jordan Peterson. The prospects for people with bipolar disorder improved rapidly and drastically in the second half of the 20th century. It was no longer, the options on the table were no longer cutting up a part of your brain and making you mentally disabled, finger blasting and talking about your mother for hours. Now there was something else on offer. There was an actual medication that worked, and it's actually a medication that's still circling through my whole body as I make this video. And that, of course, is lithium. Lithium had a very strange birth. actually in Australia. I mean, of course, it wasn't born there. It's an eternal element, as old as our universe. It's everywhere. However, as a medical treatment, it was discovered by this Australian psychiatrist. Before that, there were lithium baths that people would take, and some people associated them with mental health. However, the trace amount of lithium in those lithium waters was not enough for any kind of a treatment. Nevertheless, there are studies that show today that in counties in America where water contains trace amounts of lithium, there's actually less crime and mental illness. I don't know what the fuck to make of that. But anyway, back in Australia at the time, John Cade, he was a kind of a crazy fuck himself. I mean, this fucknut started out injecting urine of mentally ill patients into guinea pigs. Like, this is what he was doing. I don't know why he was doing this. What was the fucking point of it? And frankly, I don't know. I don't know if I want to know, all right? Then he had an idea for some reason of injecting lithium into guinea pigs. And he noticed that a lot of these guinea pigs begin to chill on lithium. They really relaxed. Now, it could be the effects of lithium on them, or it could be that he just gave them a crazy high dose that was borderline toxic, and they were like on the verge of death. Well, it doesn't matter. He decided to give it to his patients, before, of course, injecting it into himself to see if it was safe. That's just how John operated. And it's just John Cade. That's what the fuck he does, you know? This motherfucker probably rode a fucking kangaroo to his office every day. He was just fucking nuts. So once he gave lithium to his patients, you know, to the mentally ill people, a lot of them improved. They really improved. They really improved, unless they fucking died. Because a few of them died. Because he didn't know how to dose that shit, and he just gave them toxic levels of lithium. Nevertheless, I must salute John Cade. I mean, what human progress ever happened without injecting human urine into guinea pigs? All right, now a few people died out of lithium toxicity. What are you gonna do? I'm really grateful for this lithium. I pop 3 of these pills every day for a total of 1,800 milligrams of lithium in my system. And in fact, I'm pretty sure that this video wouldn't happen, or my channel wouldn't happen, if I wasn't on lithium, because when I was living in my bipolar universe, I was really incapable of actually focusing on any creative project for any amount of time. And lithium has helped many people, millions of people in fact. Lithium has become the standard for bipolar disorder. Lithium is the edgy drug. It's the coolest drug to have. Fucking Nirvana made a song about it. Would there ever be a song about Prozac or Xanax or whatever, or an antipsychotic Geodone? I highly doubt it. Lithium is on the periodic table. It's in the universe. It lives in the stars. It was here at the genesis of existence. Lithium is fucking awesome. Lithium fucking lives in the stars. Unfortunately, when it lives in your kidneys, it could kill you. But however, the dosing of lithium has improved over time, and they have come down radically. And today, psychiatrists understand much better how to dose lithium. And you also take periodic blood tests a couple of times a year when you are on lithium to see the lithium levels, but they also check the levels, I think it's of creatinine. Anyway, they check to see if your kidneys are healthy. And it's not gonna, unless you overdose on lithium, it's not gonna destroy your kidneys suddenly. In fact, they will see deterioration, and then they will take you off of lithium. And in fact, to understand how much people are attached to their lithium, how much they feel that it has restored their sanity. There are people, bipolar people who are on lithium, who were told that they will have to go on dialysis if they don't stop it, and they still want to persist with lithium. They don't want to take a risk with another medication. Lithium doesn't work for all people with bipolar, but for many people for whom it did work, especially at the beginning, it radically transformed their lives. You have to remember that the very notion of a psychoactive medication was extremely new, and suddenly people were getting these pills that have stopped their bipolar cycles. So there are people who ended up going to medical ward, were institutionalized periodically, every couple of years or maybe every year. And suddenly they were taking this pill and it all stopped. There were famous poets who started taking lithium and who wrote poems to it, etc. I mean, it really improved a lot of lives. But not only did lithium redefine the treatment of bipolar disorder, it also redefined psychiatry itself. You see, psychiatry was dominated by Freudians. It was dominated by this digging into the unconscious. And there were a group of rebel psychiatrists who were gathering to attack this establishment, this psychoanalytic establishment. You see, they didn't want to spend hours talking about their patient secretly wanting to fuck their mothers. They didn't want to analyze their stupid dreams for hours. What they wanted to do was to have psychiatry be a normal medical science without all this kind of libido and all this shit. They just wanted it to be a normal medical science, the way you go to a doctor. However, they didn't really have anything in their arsenal. They didn't have a lot of effective therapies. And when lithium made it to the scene, this was their major weapon. And along with other medications, they have crushed psychoanalysis. And today you, by skimming the Wikipedia entry about Freud and psychoanalysis, will know more about it than your average psychiatrist. So it went from these hour-long sessions that went on forever, talking about your unconscious life and relationship to your parents, to what we have today, which is a 20-minute session where they just try to peddle the latest medication that the rep from the drug company has given to them, the latest sample. Isn't it awesome? Well, anyway, I do think with all the flaws, it is a huge improvement, and I have benefited from this new psychiatry. Understanding bipolar disorder is relatively simple. Obviously, it's a mood disorder. It's a mood disorder along with depression. Bipolar, of course, indicates two poles, whereas depression, unipolar depression, indicates obviously one pole. There's no unipolar mania. There is no person who just experiences mania. Maybe there are, but they never go to the psychiatrist because their lives are so awesome. Now, our body is obviously a tango of interconnected systems, and one of those systems is a system that regulates mood. Obviously, it's not located in one part of the brain. Of course, it's not completely understood, and it's also affected by other parts of the body. Hormones affect mood, of course, the thyroid. These things affect mood and others. Diseases obviously happen when one of these systems goes wrong. It could go wrong because of genetics, could go wrong because of environment, of poor diet, etc. Usually it's a combination of the two. And it's the same way with bipolar. People who have mental illness or bipolar in their family have a higher probability of developing bipolar. Identical twins, if one of the twins is affected by bipolar disorder, has bipolar disorder, the other identical twin has an elevated risk of developing bipolar disorder, but it is by no means 100%. So there are some environmental contributors to the development of the illness. It's very well possible that a person is predisposed toward bipolar disorder by genetics, and then some sort of a stress event or something like that triggers this response that then escalates and becomes a permanent feature of life. One way to metaphorically think about your mood regulating system is thinking of it like it was a power grid. It gives you energy and it withdraws energy for you. However, it's connected with reality. If your mood regulating system is functioning well, your moods are connected with reality. And in a person with bipolar disorder, they're just not connected with reality. So let's take, for example, depression and sadness. Now, sadness and depression have the same relationship to each other as like having a beer while you're watching a football game versus becoming a degenerate alcoholic. Even though they're completely different in a way, they still exist on the same spectrum. So, for example, let's say you feel sad. Now, when you feel sad, you withdraw from the world, you have an unpleasant experience, and you start to ruminate. You start asking yourself, how could things have gone differently in this situation. The thing about sadness is that it eventually ends, and when it ends, you have a new kind of way of relating to the world. For example, if a person has hurt your feelings and you're feeling very emo, maybe after feeling sad, you will withdraw from that person or potentially confront that person. There's some sort of a plan of action that could potentially emerge out of sadness. In that aspect of sadness, when you ruminate about the past, you find something that you can modify, or at least there's a potential for that. So let's take sadness and let's imagine that the power grid isn't working very well. For one thing, sadness will emerge out of nowhere and it will become depression if it doesn't immediately become depression. Right, so it's already disconnected from reality at that point. There doesn't have to be a stimulus for it to emerge. So instead of rumination, you will have self-hatred, potentially a sense of guilt, a sense of an inadequacy, so helping you in no way whatsoever. That's one component. And instead of withdrawing from the world, you become entirely paralyzed. You just become paralyzed depending on the severity of the depression. So you might just be withdrawn, that is to say you can go to work, but you feel sad and disconnected and you really don't partake in any social activities or advance yourself in the world in any way, but you are able to function at work. And then if you go further, you cannot function at work and you stay in the room most of the time, you rarely leave the bed. Then go a little bit further, you almost never leave the bed, you don't take a shower, etc. And finally, if you go to the extreme of depression, you have catatonic depression. And a person with catatonic depression just sits and stares at the wall. Literal total paralysis. A person with catatonic depression will resemble somebody with a stroke. And one time when I had a job transporting patients, I did encounter a man with catatonic depression. And I literally thought he had a stroke when we were loading him into the ambulette. It was a really kind of a horrible thing to see. So let's consider the other side of the bipolar cycle, where instead of your energy withdrawing and collapsing into paralysis, where there is a power surge, where you surge forward in the world. So what are the normal range of experiences people get when they have an elevated mood? Well, they can be more social. They're more energetic, obviously. They need less sleep. People with bipolar disorder in manic stages need very little sleep. Sometimes they skip sleep whatsoever. Their sleep cycle is completely interrupted. Depending on the person, they can become more social and people become hypersexual. So for example, in my case, when I was manic, I would just go to bars alone and start talking with women. Something that is very antithetical to the way I am in day-to-day life. But there are people who actually go further. Now, the interesting thing about bipolar is that this power surge and this kind of withdrawal of power, but especially mania, it filters through different people in different ways. And it depends on your inclinations in the way that it's going to manifest themselves.
I didn't see the connections. I didn't see the faults in myself so much. I knew there was something wrong with me, but I didn't know what. I thought, I'm an artist. I'm an artist, I'm temperamental. Artists are temperamental. I'm like Vincent van Gogh. That used to be a big transvestite bar there. When I was a kid, I had a teddy bear. That was my friend. And my bear went with me everywhere. Gradually, the bear morphed into other things, and gradually it became Carlotta. I think of her as my muse. She comes out in many forms. I saw her as a showgirl, and so there's a Dora Duncan-like figure, always a woman of incredible character and interest. Or, on the other hand, a really sexy bitch, Mae West kind of figure. So, I really liked dressing up. I really liked transforming myself into a woman. And I wore all black. I always wore all black and orange red hair.
I believe the Carlotta phase, that was going on, but I didn't see it.
He never revealed it to me, but I knew something was up. He got a post office box. He stole some of my jewelry. I'm convinced.
Carlotta used to carry her ice pick with her, you know, just in case she got confronted by anybody that would want to mess with her. I would skewer them with my ice pick. That was always my fantasy. Being bipolar, it's the roller coaster ride of your life.
So for example, in my case, I have an inclination apparently toward hyper-religiosity. So my sense of meaning would spike, my sense of spirituality in often case would spike. The world would become more colorful and mysterious and beautiful when I would experience mania. Just in the same way that people have different reactions to different drugs, like people could get very paranoid on marijuana and it's a profoundly unpleasant experience. In the same way, people on mania, sometimes they become irritable, they start frantically cleaning their house, which they may or may not enjoy doing. Creativity can spike. Bipolar disorder is routinely connected with creativity. In fact, there are endless scientific articles linking creativity with bipolar disorder. So it basically like filters through this. If you're enterprising, you might get a lot of business ideas. Some of them could be great, but they're all going to be jumbled into incoherence because your power surge, your mood surge is not really connected with reality. So even if you have good ideas, they're going to go to shit.
This is the story of Paul Downs, a successful Midlands businessman. In February 2009, he spent a fortune hiring a fairy tale castle in Jamaica. Paul also invited 12 beautiful Ukrainian women, some of them part-time models, for an all-expenses-paid 2-week holiday. Paul's plan was that one of the women would become his wife. Paul had organised a number of activities for the women, including a yoga class. But he clearly had other matters on his mind. As they stretched, Paul summoned me for another announcement.
I am Yah, the voice of Allah. Allah is everything. Allah is nothing. Allah has no voice. I am that voice. I am God. Member of my home club, always was member of my home club. Never beat me, ever.
Ironically, the mania that led Paul to Jamaica to find a wife was now leading him far away from his original mission.
And he treated me like dog shit.
Ignored by Paul, the women were left to amuse themselves with a crab that was floating in the pool.
My friends, there's a whole fucking spectrum out there, a whole bipolar spectrum. So if we go back to that metaphor with the power grid, you can imagine that there are many things that could go wrong with it, and the currents will express themselves in different ways as far as disrupting a person's life. So there are people who change as far as their mood from week to week, from day to day, depressed in the morning, manic in the evening. All of those potentialities exist. And then there is bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. Now, bipolar 2 has milder manias called hypomanias, and people with bipolar 2 spend most of their time in depression. They spend most of the year in depression, but then they have periods of hypomania. And then there's bipolar 1. And bipolar 1 is distinguished from bipolar 2 by the presence of a full mania, a mania. So what is the fucking difference between a hypomania and a mania? Well, a full-blown mania can basically wreck your life. It can destroy your life. Whereas by definition, a hypomania can't. If you have a hypomania, you can have elevated mood, and you in fact can be more productive at work, and you can have creative ideas, and it could potentially even have a positive outcome on your life. You have an elevated mood that's irrational, that's higher than normal. There are a lot of things swirling in your head. But potentially it could be a very pleasant experience, even make you more productive. Unfortunately, you will then slide into a depression. With a full-blown mania, I mean, you go all the way out there. You can start spending money, you can start getting very aggressive, you can engage in risky behaviors, you can break up with your wife, and you can have psychosis. So psychosis is defined by delusional thoughts, by hearing and seeing things that aren't there. Essentially, basically, a person with psychosis, with bipolar disorder, could be indistinguishable from a person with schizophrenia. However, in the case of bipolar disorder, it does go away. It always goes away whether you're medicated or not. That kind of psychosis goes away. And this is why if you would ever read different memoirs by people with bipolar disorder, they will always kind of flaunt their madness. They would say, oh, I was so mad, you know, I was so fucking crazy and out of it. Sort of kind of how I did with my opening to this video. And this is the reason why people with bipolar flaunt that shit so much, is because it goes away. And then sometimes days or weeks later after the episode, you can reflect on it and just have a laugh. I mean, you're not going to have too much of a laugh because you could have potentially gone bankrupt and destroyed your life in the meantime. But nevertheless, like eventually you just, hey, I was telepathically communicating with Michael Jackson. Well, people with schizophrenia don't quite have the same bravado when it comes to their madness because their psychosis doesn't go away and they have to be heavily medicated. No, it's just less of a laughing matter for them than it is for bipolar. And even if you're bipolar, it's not that much of a laughing matter because, as I said, you can fuck up your life entirely.
Although confused and disorientated at times, I was eventually able to make some sense of Paul's extraordinary mind.
It was a fantasy, and I believed every part of it. And of course, you spend ridiculous sums of money. It cost me about $250,000, the overall trip. And you think, what on earth have I done? That's one of the things that you do, is you spend every penny you get your hands on.
Today there is a wide perception that psychiatric conditions are being overdiagnosed. And yet I became a perfect statistic when I was diagnosed at the age of 30 with bipolar. There are tons of people who get diagnosed at this age. It's because bipolar is kind of deceptive, it's somewhat of a chameleon. Because people tend not to go to their psychiatrist when they're feeling manic. When you're feeling a very intricate high, a very advanced high, you're not gonna go to the psychiatrist. A fucking psychiatrist is the last place you wanna go when you're feeling this way. In fact, many people with bipolar disorder who have experienced mania and then tried other drugs have said that, for example, cocaine feels like Bud Light compared to mania, that mushrooms don't compare with it. I haven't done that many drugs, but I mean, when it comes to like alcohol and marijuana, I mean, there's no fucking competition with mania. Of course, some people don't experience mania pleasantly, but those who do aren't gonna go to the fucking psychiatrist when they're riding that high. When you are about to be recognized by the Dalai Lama as his former associate from the break of the 20th century, this is no time to go to a shrink. This is your time to make destiny happen. This is your time. People do go to the shrink when they feel depressed. However, psychiatrists might be incompetent, or people with bipolar may be deceptive, or a combination of the two, and they just don't get diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And if you had to take a crude guess, if you just had to take the most crude and cartoonish guess as to what effect antidepressants have on people with bipolar disorder, what would it be? Yep, exactly. They make people manic. They make them very manic. And that's exactly what happened to me. The most intense mania I ever had was after I went to a psychiatrist and he prescribed me an antidepressant, not suspecting at all that I was manic. I'm sorry, that I was bipolar. And then it just escalated. Let me tell you, man, I became a different person. All right, great. Yeah, you can like, with this thing you can like twist it and move it around somewhat. Yeah, as you do any, that's fine.
Okay. Will you tell us a bit about yourself and the website?
About myself and the website. My name is Ivan. I was born in Moscow, Russia in 1985. I just read that it's the year of the wood ox. in the Chinese astrological calendar. And Woodocks are supposed to be easygoing and intellectual in nature. And my father is a theoretical physicist, so my parents are really oriented toward science and math. And the website is Buddhapedia, and it's just for people who want to know more about Buddhism and want to have a foundation or an overview of this ancient path. So that's that.
What kind of materials will be on the website?
The materials the most important part of the website is going to be the little lessons I tell about Buddhism. The irony is that people always go on some journey to find themselves. Like if you're a Westerner, you just go to India or something, and then you get food that you can't digest, and then you're seasick, and you still haven't found yourself. But the real place to find yourself is inside yourself, and if you look deeply enough, then you'll know there's nothing there, just a continuum of energy that can go spastic, or it can just flow in a relaxed manner toward enlightenment. So you can spaz out and freak out your whole life, or you can just go with the flow, and that's what I'm trying to do myself, and that's what I want you to get out of it. Just go with the flow, baby. I have a degree in political science from Ohio State University, and I think the reason I do have that degree because from my earliest conscious life, my earliest thinking life, I was interested in power, and politics is about the pursuit of external power, politics, government, and Buddhism is about the pursuit of true power that's internal, where you don't need to have a crowd of people around you, you don't need to have riches and women and farm animals. All you need is a firm foundation and compassion and wisdom. And where I was going, oh yeah, and the Dalai Lama is an embodiment of spiritual freedom, an embodiment of wisdom and compassion, but he's also somebody who has worldly influence and worldly power that he does to benefit all beings. I really have great appreciation coming from political science background, being a political scientist, about what His Holiness has done for sentient beings. So I really feel blessed to have this necklace. I became a different person entirely. So this is the paradox of being bipolar in the 21st century. On the one hand, psychiatry is powerful enough to make real advancement in your lives by prescribing you lithium and other medications that really make you functional in life and make you able to record this fucking pointless, endless fucking video forever that nobody's gonna watch. I didn't have this functionality before. I really didn't have it. On the other hand, it is powerful enough that when it makes mistakes, these mistakes could be huge. And so for most of my life, the type of bipolar that I exhibited naturally was more of bipolar 2, on a more intense side of that scale. That is to say, I would have pretty intense hypomanias, but I never experienced a total mania. And then I would spend most of my life in kind of a depression, and a milder depression, not a full-on clinical depression. And yet once I've been introduced to this antidepressant, I had a full-blown mania, and then a couple of years later I had another mania that wasn't as intense, that could have also potentially been impacted by supplement I've been taking at the time. So yes, in that sense, I was scared away from psychiatry. I didn't want to have anything to do with it, and I just continued with my life as it became unraveled more and more over time, slowly. And then finally, when I was 30 years old, and you look back at my history, there's no fucking doubt that I am bipolar. To the extent that you can make a linear diagnosis in psychiatry, I mean, there is no doubt that I have it, starting with my teenage years. But unfortunately, It only becomes clear in retrospect. And this is exactly why, because of these stumbles and rumbles, because of not reporting mania, this is exactly why it takes so long for many people with bipolar disorder to get diagnosed by the time they've already wasted huge parts of their lives. But here's the thing I want to conclude with as far as talking about bipolar disorder. You know, when we talk about mood in day-to-day language, people say like, oh, he's moody or she's moody, whatever. Like there is a triviality to the word mood. And it's sort of like if you turn on and off your lamp, your bedside lamp, you don't really have the same kind of, the great sense of electricity. The same sense you would have if a fucking unsecured wire fell on you and you got a fucking shock and almost died. When your mood is well regulated, it correlates with reality. Not perfectly, nothing is perfect in the human body, but something happens to you, you react with a mood, and then it stabilizes, and then you go on, something else happens, etc. Well, when you're yanked around by this mood with bipolar disorder, you realize, at least I did, that it's something elemental. Now, I don't know what a bear feels. I don't know what a bear feels when it goes into hibernation, all right? How the fuck would I know what a fucking bear feels? Are you fucking stupid? How would I fucking know what a bear feels? What the fuck is wrong with me, man? However, if I had to imagine what a bear feels, I would have to say that it has something to do with mood. Like, for all of us, mood naturally, spikes in the spring, and this is when many people become bipolar, because they're just like normal people, except their mood, overshoots. And I have always, generally speaking, became more manic in the spring or in the beginning of the year, in the first few months of the year. In fact, on this channel even, I've been looking around and I've noticed that I've made a ton of videos during these months, first months of the year. A lot of these videos were shitty and I erased them. But there is something elemental to mood. You know, like when migrating birds go somewhere, something is happening metaphorically or literally that's related to mood. Mood is a fucking driver of life. You expand into the world, you look for mates, you look for adventure, you look for novelty, for stimulation, or you contract into yourself and you withdraw from the world. And like I said at the beginning of this video, for people with bipolar disorder, this constant motion, this constant sort of yanking around by mood, that's who they are. That's our elemental rhythm. And when I first got diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I was in the midst of the longest depression, clinical depression I ever had. And whenever I read about bipolar disorder, people with bipolar disorder going off their medication, I always thought to myself, what a bunch of stupid assholes. But you see, the longer I've been medicated, paradoxically, the more I relate to them. That doesn't mean I still think it's stupid to go off medication. I still think it's profoundly stupid and I'm not going to do it anytime soon. But I have gained an increased empathy for them because something is missing in me now that my mood is more stable. Because fucking lithium can't solve all of my problems. It can just contain them. And so, yes, a lot of the horrible aspects of bipolar have so far been gone from my life. But a lot of the good parts of it have been gone as well, and overall some shitty parts still remain because they can't be easily gotten rid of. And so there is a kind of, it's like, why would you want to be a fucking bipolar clown? Why would you be this asshole, a deluded asshole? Well, yeah, of course it's stupid, it's ridiculous to believe that you're a reincarnated llama, believe that you're going to be the president of Russia and create a Tibetan republic within Russia. It's all a joke. It's all insane. The way it works is that your mood gets more and more elevated, and the more your mood gets disconnected from reality, your conscious thinking, kind of like a dancing monkey that usually does a slow dance, a normal dance correlated with reality, now that it's disconnected from reality and connected with this elevated mood, it just kind of goes into overdrive, and as the music goes on, the song that has to be composed alongside this music gets more and more intense. But if you forget about the song, if you forget about the text and the delusions, there's a powerful embrace of life. And so as much of a deluded moron I was when I was manic, there were also times when I would walk around Seattle at night alone, and I felt completely connected with the universe. I felt supercharged. I felt alive. I felt alive in a way that I haven't felt in years. And so that's kind of that's bipolar for you, man. It is in a sense tempting to go back to being a tragic bipolar clown who might end their life in an unconventional fashion, rather than being a sober loser sitting in their mother's house and contemplating life that often feels so fucking boring.
I love living on the razor's edge. That was part of my persona. One of my favorite stories is getting stopped by the police at 4 a.m. in downtown Los Angeles in full drag. And I had a crack pipe in my car. And I said, I'm in deep trouble now. If they find a crack pipe and they come back to me, do I challenge them? Do I really be the angel of death and pull the ice pick out of my purse and go at them? I would pull it out, and then we'd have suicide by cop. All hell would have broken loose right there in the street, because I wasn't about to go into jail. I would have fought them.
I will very quickly go over my family history of mental illness. Naturally, people with bipolar disorder have a higher chance of having people with bipolar disorder in their family, and have a higher chance of having people in their family who have other mental illnesses. Now, you have zero chance of ever meeting these people. I'll be talking about some of them are dead, but nevertheless, I will still keep them anonymous, because probably they wouldn't want me to exhibit their mental health history to strangers on the internet. These people aren't my parents, but they are directly above me on the family tree. They're not like third cousins or anything like that. One person I'll mention was exhibiting signs of clinical depression, basically rarely leaving his room for months, not interacting with people, seeming to derive no joy from life. Now, this person has been consuming alcohol. However, I personally think that it's likely that depression came first and alcohol was more of a way to self-medicate, though it could be the reverse. Who knows? So this is the first person, and the second person I'll mention had a very painful separation from a loved one. And so she went to a soothsayer, a Roma person who otherwise known as gypsies. And she went to this person to remedy the situation. Now, this in itself is not insane. A lot of people do this in Eastern Europe and elsewhere. However, what was insane is what started happening in her head vis-a-vis the soothsayer. She started to believe that the soothsayer basically controlled almost everything in the world, could read her thoughts. She started to gather all of her valuables and giving it to this person. Even when this person and the family of this soothsayer wanted to reject things, she still would bring them over again and again and again, basically giving all of her things away, almost all of her things. She had to be physically restrained from going there. I mean, this has been going on for years. And she really was convinced that this soothsayer had immense powers, almost like godlike powers. So this person was then confined to a mental institution where she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and put on a heavy regimen of antipsychotics. And eventually, after a couple of these institutionalizations, she did recover. Now, was this a manic episode? I don't know at this point. I would have to ask them more questions about what happened, but it's kind of awkward to bring up their whole kind of history of mental health throughout their life, so I just kind of drop it and let it go. So these are the two cases from my genetic pool that I decided to mention.
You have many treasures. Who did you rob for this?
We didn't rob them. They all came from inside the house.
I will look on your treasures, Gypsy. Is this understood? I will look on them.
Please do.
The basic foundations of our brain development is done by the end of childhood. However, there are final tucks, little changes that are completed in adolescence and early adulthood. And something associated with these changes seem to trigger bipolar disorder and schizophrenia, which begin to emerge in late teens, early 20s. And this outlines the typical development of the illness. That is to say, it appears in that time frame and goes on from there. And so this seems to preclude the development of bipolar disorder in childhood. However, there is such a category, such a thing as childhood onset bipolar disorder, where children seem to exhibit signs of bipolar disorder like mania and depression in their childhood years, obviously. Well, this is kind of controversial, and some people dispute it, some psychiatrists do, and it's controversial as to whether children should be given these adult medications of the type that I'm taking. Well, the reason I bring this whole shit up, and we're not gonna settle it here, and I fucking don't care that much about children. Well, anyway, I care about children, I just fucking don't know. I don't know, and I don't give a shit for the purposes of this video. All I wanted to say is that I had no such things. I didn't have mania as a child. I didn't have depression as a child. I was born in the Soviet Union, lived in the Soviet Union for about 6 years of my life. When it collapsed, then I started living in the Russian Federation. And in spite of the misery surrounding us, in spite of all the horrors that were going on in the motherland at the time, I had a very happy childhood. For some reason, people in Russia just let their kids run around, even at a very young age, below 10, and would just leave our apartment buildings and just run around, explore the woods, explore the bushes with passed out alcoholics. One of the incentives, I guess, to let us out and play outside is because in my family at the time, 5 people, including myself, lived in a small 3-bedroom apartment. So that could give an imperative to let the kids get out and play. Sure, there was that one time that a pedophile tried to grab my friend and drag him into a car, but whatever, man, let's not dwell on the negativity. Why bring up this negativity when my friend Victor got away, alright? It's not a big deal. Really isn't a big deal. I had a lot of friends, and I was a pretty creative kid. I drew, I painted, I wrote some sort of an essay about being in World War II when I was like 8. The World War II is always on your mind in Russia. One of the interesting things I do remember from my childhood is I would play this game with 2 of my younger friends, and it was kind of a game we called Levels, and it was a sophisticated game of make-believe. It was almost like I was creating an RPG type environment from them. They were the heroes in the game, and I was the game itself. That is to say, I would play different roles, play different actors, they would have to battle different villains, etc., and we would play this for hours and days. Both of these friends, both of whom are now in like their late 20s, early 30s, still recall this game Levels that I put together for them. And I just think that it's very ironic that the same brain and the same mind, in a more mature form, would also create levels, except this time for myself, ridiculous levels that I actually believed in. I think it was in 6th grade when I shared a desk at school with a kid named Ivan. Now the thing about this other Ivan is he had unorthodox fashion choices. I mean, he wore a green denim shirt, like a long sleeve shirt, every day. And also green denim pants. And not even in 1990s Russia was that shit acceptable. Or at very least, it wasn't acceptable to me. Because like a complete asshole, I would bully him all the time. And I distinctly remember this one moment of evil power, evil early teenage years power that I exhibited when I drove him into hysterics and he was ripping apart his textbook and throwing chunks of them at me, and I was like doing this dance, you know, kind of as if I was dancing around bullets. I think I was inspired by that movie Mask with Jim Carrey. This was also the time when I have experienced the best case of trolling directed against me. Nobody has ever surpassed this masterful trolling. And the troll was this Ivan's grandmother. Ivan's grandmother one time came to our school, and I think it was a parent visitation day or whatever. And Ivan and I were sitting there behind our joint desk. She came in, looked at me, and then turned to Ivan and said, "Who's this nice pretty girl sitting next to you?" And Ivan was just, I never saw a happier person in my life. He just kind of threw his head back and just laughed and laughed. I mean, it was just a very happy time for him. But yeah, this was excellent. But aside from torturing people with the same first name that I have, aside from being a little shit and asshole, there were other things happening. One thing that happened was the fact that I wasn't performing well at school at all. I was very distracted. I was the class clown. I was constantly running around. I wasn't able to focus on anything. It is at this time that I remember one of my parents, who I will not expose here, who picked up my papers with bad marks on them and said, "What is this, Ivan? What is this?" And then just slapped me with them. I guess this is how things were done. Anyway, I had real bad problems in school, and eventually my mother moved me to a private school that was populated largely by children of mafia, of the Russian mafia, or whatever. I mean, I got along with them. It was all well and good. But these kinds of symptoms like hyperactivity, inability to focus, that would be diagnosed as ADHD or ADD in America, these are very typical for kids who could later develop bipolar disorder. I mean, if you think about an adult mind with potential for hyperactivity and how it would express itself at an earlier age, it could make sense, though who the fuck knows. The other thing that happened during that time is that I became a very religious Christian. Now, you have to remember that I was like 11, 12 years old or something, and that I also come from a very secular family. Now, I'm about to be 33, as I've mentioned before, and never in my life have I ever heard any religious conversation in my household at all. I have never heard either my mother or my father ever mention God at all. Now, I have a grandmother who's superficially religious, but really it translates into nothing. She doesn't like to go to church. She doesn't really like church at all. She never hardly ever talks about it, aside from mentioning that she prays for us. So there's no real religion in my household. And so it was kind of an odd thing to do. Nobody really encouraged me. No one wanted me to do it. There was a revival of the Russian Orthodox Church going on at the time after the collapse of communism, but still it was a little bit odd. I don't know any sort of situations where in a secular family, like their 12-year-old suddenly becomes a fundamentalist Christian when there's nobody like that in the family. In fact, I went to confession, went to Mass. In the Russian Mass, Russian Orthodox Mass, you actually have to stand up straight for like 2 hours or more. I wanted to repent before the green denim Ivan. I wanted to connect with him and offer my apologies for my unchristian bullying of him. And so the reason I bring this up is because hyperreligiosity is not just a concept in psychiatry, it's an actual classified symptom. And this is what I have experienced during manic stages and what many people experience. So for the past 2 years when I've been going to this center, to this behavioral center, they always ask me, my therapist, my psychiatrist, any religious thoughts? Any religious thoughts at all? Because they were associated with my psychosis. It's not a very intimate thing to say. I want to tell them how I was Agvan Dorjev. I want to tell them, well, anyway, at this point I don't want to tell them shit. And I just say nope, no religious thoughts. Everything is just a mark. Ivan, the religious psychotic, like any hyper-religiosity, no. And therefore it's kind of interesting that I experienced this religious awakening at the age of 12 or whatever, in light of where religion would take me later on. I don't know if they're related. I don't want to relate everything in my life with bipolar disorder, but it is an interesting thing that has happened. It was at this time that my mother moved ahead of me to America, and I stayed behind with my grandmother so that things could be prepared there in the States. My mother went on a student visa and was getting 2 graduate degrees and an MBA and a Master of Quantitative Analysis, if you must know. So this was the time when I went to a Mass at the Russian Orthodox Church with my friend's religious mother. And she decided to ask a priest for a blessing for me to go to America. Oh, that bearded motherfucker sure was stingy with his blessing. He didn't fucking want to bless a Russian boy leaving the motherland. You know, maybe he saw ahead in time and saw my kind of shitty analytics for my YouTube channel. Okay, well, maybe that didn't happen exactly that way, but he did refuse a blessing to me. With or without a blessing from the church father, I did set out to America. And when I arrived here in the States, my life became pretty miserable. For one thing, I didn't know English very well. I knew it on a very limited basic level. And so I basically had no friends, I had no connections with anybody. And for the first time, I was pretty much alone. My mother was getting these degrees and she was under a lot of stress, so we didn't interact that much. My parents were getting a divorce. I was pretty pudgy, I was very pale and kind of miserable. In fact, when I went back to Russia, people smelled my weakness. And these stereotypes in Adidas tracksuits, gopniki, the gopniks, they would rob me on a few occasions, man. I gave them a few hundred rubles, which probably amounted to like $2. But whatever, it was just, even in Russia, even when I went back home for the summer, things weren't good for me at all. And there were other things happening at the time that I don't want to talk about right now. I wasn't molested or anything, but things that have impacted me negatively. So theoretically, it's possible that this period of sadness maybe triggered some sort of a cycle of emotional responses that would later calcify in bipolar disorder. When I first moved to America, the apartment my mother and I were living in had a strange person walking around our building. And in fact, this guy held a sign, "Abortion is murder." And this was not just a random thing for him. In fact, we lived pretty close to an abortion clinic, and so he would always wave to us when my mother pulled out. What an adventure, a real kind of rags to riches story. And the first school that I went to in America for 7th and 8th grade was called the Academy of World Languages, a public school in Cincinnati. And this school had a pretty large English as a second language program. I was just a part of this international group of kids. There were kids from Vietnam, from Nigeria, from every continent, from Latin America, from the former Yugoslav countries. All of us, of course, by definition, didn't speak English very well. And so we felt comfortable with each other, not self-conscious. And though I was kind of shy at the beginning, it was fine by the end. I had friends there. One of my friends became Boris, codename Boris. His real name isn't Boris, who's from Ukraine, and we're still friends to this day. We actually got into a fight, and for some reason they put us together in the same room. Later on, our families were convinced that this was some sort of a clever psychological maneuver to get us to like each other. Somehow I fucking doubt it. Maybe it was, but anyway, it fucking worked out because we say horrible things to each other in email to this day. Now, when it came time for high school, my mother has advanced in the hierarchy of American life. And so she, specifically in the segregated school district environment of America, she moved to a nice upper middle class neighborhood, and I was set to go to a nice upper middle class school. And this is when my psychological problems began, when I started acting unusual. The thing about it is that I don't want to blame the school for it, because I think it was just time, as far as brain development or lack thereof, for these flowers to blossom. And boy did they fucking blossom. So the first school that I went to, the Academy of World Languages, the only people in that school were black people and immigrants. I literally remember one white American student, just one. Maybe there were more, but that's the only one I remember. However, this new school that I went to was, 80-90% white. And these weren't just white people, these were upper middle class white people. In fact, if you were to go in the student parking lot, there were a few BMWs there. In my last school, by the end of it, I didn't feel self-conscious. I was surrounded by immigrants, I was surrounded by mangled English. We weren't self-conscious around each other, there was a comfort there. However, here, I was now surrounded by real, true, blue fucking white Americans. And this is exactly what Boris, codename Boris, and I would call them. this obvious term, white people. We would say that girl is attractive, but she's too white. She just kind of gives off that white vibe. Now, I don't know what people from the Caribbean or Africa called African Americans. I don't know. But this is what, and from the beginning it created a sense of alienation. But it created a sense of fear and awkwardness for me, because I didn't know how to navigate in this environment, in this culture. Not only was my English pretty poor, that is to say, it of course has improved in like 2 years or so I've been in America, but nevertheless I just didn't understand irony. I didn't understand their humor, I didn't understand their culture. In a sense, I still don't. I still don't understand their fucking culture. They can go fuck. Oh, I'm just joking around. I love white people. That's the one thing I always said on this channel. I fucking love white people. Not that the school was populated by great wits and ironists, but this kind of upper middle class kind of irony that's trite to me by now was really novel to me. I didn't navigate it, and overall, I was bullied a little bit in an arts class. I had this nervous tick, that unfortunately, as has been pointed out to me when this guy said, "Ivan, are you sucking dicks?" Yeah, unfortunately, has a resemblance that I didn't pick up right away. And so what I decided to do is just shut down and kind of figure this place out before I really start talking. Like, essentially, I stopped talking unless I absolutely had to. Unless I was pressed in the corner and I had to say something, I stopped talking. So here you can shed some salty tears for me, because unfortunately this strategy never went away. It's just continued with me until the end of high school. So throughout high school, I never went to a party. Not only did I not go to a party, and I've never been in a true blue American's house, in a white American's house. I've only been there once for a school project. I still remember it. I still remember, obviously, like, no dates, no prom, nothing. I was just completely began to descend into my own hermit world. This has not been the way I've been as a child. This hasn't been the way I've been in my previous school, but this has now become my life, and in a way kind of echoes to this day, even though I'm not as socially awkward, obviously, as I've been in high school. So to convey to you just how mute I was during this time frame, you see, I used to sit with this group of guys at lunch. I mean, it was just a horrible time at the beginning of the year when I had to find somebody to sit with at lunch. I didn't want to sit by myself. And so I would sit with these guys, and because I didn't talk, I've kind of removed myself from the high school hierarchy. That is to say, I wasn't uncool, generally speaking. Like, you can't be uncool unless you have to say something to be uncool. If you're just dressed in a generic way every day, wearing the same generic clothes, except shittier than those of other people, then it's all fine. And so it wasn't a big deal. I would sit with these guys. I would sit with them during lunch and say absolutely nothing for the whole year. Nevertheless, there was a day I had to say something. And what happened is that I was in the same class with one of the guys I would sit with at lunch, before lunch. And this guy, during the psychology class, he just kind of fell back in his chair and passed out, and he had to be taken to the nurse. And now I was horrified by this, because now I had to convey it to the guys at lunch. I fucking had to open my mouth and explain what happened to him. And I still remember trying to say it, because I was just kind of almost, stuttering. I was stuttering as I said it. I was like, John fell in the chair in psychology class. So yeah, there was one word, unfortunately, I was forced to say. Guess what it is? That's right, man, that's nigger. I believe this happened in my second year of high school. I came back from lunch to the art class, and there were 3 guys sitting at the table. They were all African Americans. One of them was named CJ, and CJ was the fucking instigator. He was the fucking piece of shit devil behind this whole enterprise to humiliate me and make me suffer. And then there was Good Mario, which isn't his actual name. I mean, his name is Mario, but his name isn't Good Mario. He was just a good Mario in this instance. Good Mario was a basketball player. He was a nice guy, just kind of got along with everyone. And the third person was the bad Mario. Now, bad Mario was really a fucknut. Bad Mario was a fat fucknut, and also his name was a Bad Mario. Are you fucking stupid? His name was Mario. And to this day, man, I'm not a racist, but if there are like 3 guys and 2 of them are named Mario, I'm fucking out of there, man. Because this was one of the most awkward experiences in my life. Actually, I kind of forgot about it, and I just remember it now when I started filming it. So I guess it wasn't that awkward because I did forget about it. And so CJ is like, he's like, Ivan, now I'm very shy, obviously. I'm kind of a pudgy fuck back in the day, pudgy and pasty. And he's like, Ivan, say nigger. And I was like, I don't want to say it. I don't want to say it. And he's like, come on, man. You know, and then the bad Mario looks at me. And I look at good Mario. Good Mario's like just averting his eyes. He's as miserable about the whole thing as I am. This was kind of, he didn't luck out here being at the black table at this point in his life. I like good Mario. He's a cool guy. Anyway, he's like, Ivan, you know, say nigger. I was like, ah. You know, and finally I was like, you know, finally I fucking said it. I said it. And CJ just kind of smiled, and I went back to my table. Now here, the bad Mario comes over to my table, and he looks at me, and he has a knife. One of these knives that are used to cut fucking paper or whatever the fuck. Anyway, he's just tangling with this, and he's like, say it again, say nigger. I was like, I don't want to. You know, and then I had to say it. And then he just kind of looks at me, and then he walks away. And that's fucking bad Mario. And then good Mario comes over, and he's like, man, I'm sorry that happened, man. If something happens, you know, just let me know. Good Mario was miserable about the whole thing. Now, sometime afterwards, you know, of course I didn't have a car. So I walked from school back home. Who's walking behind me? Yeah, it's bad fucking Mario. Bad Mario is walking behind me. I was fucking scared shitless. I remember that episode much more than I remember the first one. Just because it's like, what the fuck? But anyway, I guess he either forgot about me or whatever. Bad Mario had other things to do, like setting his trajectory of his life to being the king of the prison shower. But it's the fucking CJ whose life I'm curious about to see what happened to him. Anyway, this had nothing to do with bipolar disorder. Unfortunately, one time Bad Mario cornered me, and he told me to say that OJ was innocent. And I was like, OJ's innocent. That didn't happen. It was just a horrible joke. I'm sorry. No, it's just a horrible joke. So you have to light up these kinds of events. And also, I'll fucking say OG is innocent. What the fuck does it cost me? I'll fucking say it anytime. So through the power of puberty and weightlifting, I transformed from this guy to this guy. And nobody really messed with me that much, except a couple of Jewish kids who cornered me and made me scream, "You have the blood of Jesus on your scheming hands." That was another unfortunate thing that happened to me, and I don't even want to talk about this event. Well, anyway, with the transformation of my body, my stupid brain was transforming as well. I became very rowdy and angry at home, in contrast with my timidity at high school. I would continuously bash through plaster walls during my fights with mother. I don't completely regret that, because I really had some good points to make at that point, you know. I really had some good points, man. Another awkward thing that happened to me at the time, almost as awkward as using the N-word, being forced to use it, was the time when my stepfather, who at that time was not yet married to my mother, came over to our apartment to repair the wall that I bashed through, and he brought over his children to introduce them to me. However, I was too shy to talk to them, so I just kind of nodded and went into another room and started watching television while they stood around as their father was repairing the wall that I broke. So this was step siblings' introduction to their weird fucking Russian stepbrother, who hasn't grown any less weird with age. You know, because sometimes they come over here with their children and their normal lives, and I just hide like a creep in my bedroom where I obviously live in my mother's house. So the fun continues. Here I'd like to say a few words about my academic performance at that time that went on throughout my high school and college. And basically it was about doing next to nothing. I came into school with a near empty backpack. Usually the backpack was there just for show, and I would have a notebook where I pretended to take notes, but really I just doodled the whole way. Now this could be an indictment of the American educational system, or a praise of my intelligence, that I was able with these efforts to graduate from high school and college. Unfortunately, I think this is more of an indictment of the American educational system, because I really did fucking next to no work. I only did the work that I absolutely had to do not to fail. And throughout this whole experience, I only failed like one chemistry class. So that was it. Another thing that happened at the time is I had some sort of a fight with my mother, I'm sure a very stupid fight. And then I got really, really emo, and I slashed my wrists. I have still like very faint marks of this event. Now at that point, I fell on the ground. There was no reason for me to be on the ground. There was no horrible blood loss or anything. But I just fell on the ground because I was an overly dramatic asshole and just was laying there on the carpet looking at my fucking stupid scars, and I thought, I want to die. This was one of the first instances where I've experienced the desire to death that continues with me basically for my whole life from then on. And yet I thought of something. I thought of a reason to live. And guess what that reason was? That's right, it was orphans in third world countries, of course. My life would really help these orphans, as it does to this day, because 100% of 0% of my Patreon goes to the orphans. But anyway, this was kind of a sign of a grandiose mission, a kind of a birth of grandiosity, where on the one hand, your brain kind of tries to nudge you toward death, but then there is something more, man. There's really a great mission for you, Ivan. There's a great mission for you, so please, don't cut your stupid wrists any further. Just leave these emo marks and add nothing more to it. Now, it might shock you, but for the first 2 years of high school, I wasn't happy with this. I wasn't happy with what was going on. Now, I was completely socially isolated, and I still wanted to be a normal kid. I wanted to be a normal kid in high school and do the things that they do, like sex, for example. Sex came to mind. But just aside from anything else, I just kind of wanted to be normal. And I also wanted to pay attention at school, to really focus on school more and perform better. I didn't like this whole equation. And guess who else thought there was something wrong with me due to all the repairs to our apartment walls? It was my mother. So we were united at this. However, I was convinced that what was wrong with me was ADD, attention deficit disorder. I was convinced with this because I was a moron. I don't relate to myself before 17 years old. I really consider myself to be a dumb little moron. And so I don't really even want to justify why I was fixated on the idea that Ritalin and a treatment for ADD is going to save my life at that point. But nevertheless, we went to a psychiatrist, and eventually I was prescribed Ritalin. Now guess if a person is predisposed to a bipolar disorder, if it's developing within them, guess what kind of an effect a stimulant like Ritalin would have on me. That's right, I became manic. I started pacing around, I started walking around the neighborhood and walked around the park, and then I came home, my mother was home, and I wanted to tell her something. But the interesting thing, that even though I was formulating thoughts in my head, I couldn't say anything. It was a bizarre experience. You want to say something, but you can't say it. So I was taken to the emergency room, where the doctor kind of patted me on the shoulder and said, kind of might have had a little stroke or something. He said I had a micro stroke, potentially. Something like that. Fuck it, let's forget about it and move on with my life. I don't fucking know what happened there. The first round of my interaction with psychiatry has concluded, and it followed the typical pattern. I thought there was something wrong with me. I really wanted to fix it, and went to a psychiatrist. It ended in a disaster, and I moved away from it. But in fact, there was bigger things going on. And the bigger things that were happening is the fact that I stopped I stopped being concerned about my isolation. I was beginning to be more and more comfortable with myself as a hermit. And there were a couple of reasons for it. One reason was the fact that I began having an intellectual life. After hearing about psychoanalysis in a psychology class, I became a big-time devotee of Sigmund Freud. I read 2 biographies of him. I read his papers, certain ones of his papers. I read histories of the movement. I really hated Carl Jung because he broke with Freud. And I even read the interpretations of dreams. Man, fucking try reading that shit at any age, especially 17. Try reading the last fucking chapters of that book that are barely coherent. I really loved Freud. I felt that Freud has exposed me to some secret knowledge, kind of this horrible term red pill that people use on the internet. I really had a red pill about the true nature of humanity, these hidden forces that other people in my high school didn't know about. Yeah, they might get laid and have a normal social life and be, you know, just psychologically healthy, but do they know that they secretly wanted to fuck their mother in their childhood? I knew. You see, I had posters of Sigmund Freud, and I even acquired this action figure that remains to me to this day. In fact, I had an action figure of Chewbacca and an action figure of Freud. Chewbacca representing, of course, the unconscious mind. And they both stood on my monitor. How is it possible that I, didn't know the favors of a lady in that time frame? So I felt a certain confidence as a result of it. I started reading serious books of history, etc. And I had a confidence based around that. And naturally, at that age of a teenage intellectual, of a teenage psychoanalyst, I developed an elitism toward my other classmates. They didn't have as deep of a life as I did. They couldn't possibly understand me. Now, since that time, and especially after I turned 30, that whole sense of elitism has been entirely washed out of me. Because as I look around, as I drive my cargo van for work right now, and I look out the window, every single fucking person out there, including probably the homeless, are much better able to navigate in this life than I am. So whatever my IQ may or may not be, or whatever my skills may or may not be, like there is very little foundation for elitism and snobbery that remains, because I am utterly incompetent at living as an adult. Freud has referred in his writings, in his autobiographical writings, etc., to this splendid isolation, something he called splendid isolation. And I was beginning to experience this for myself. Isolation was no longer a burden, but there was something making it very splendid for me. And that was the birth of hypomania, the birth of mild mania that I was beginning to experience in my high school years. That is to say, whereas my cave was bleak and cold before, now there were different fires, different lights dancing on the wall. There was a sense of warmth in there, and a sense of profound meaning in this isolation. Little did I know, man, I was living in Plato's cave. I was living in Plato's cave. In the middle of my senior year of high school, I had a revelation. I decided to just stop going to school one day. One day I declared to my mother, I'm no longer going back to that school. At this point, I don't remember what motivated that decision, or whether there was some sort of a stupid fight at home or something that happened in school. I have no idea. I have no idea what motivated this decision, but I do have a sense of what the undercurrent of that decision was, and probably I just had one of these manic bursts of enthusiasm, a desire for a completely different life, a cry for freedom from the depth of my crazy fucking heart. What followed next was a rebellion, in a sense, against my mother, completely subsidized by my mother. That's what happened. We ended up agreeing that I was going to move to Columbus, Ohio, and eventually go to the Ohio State University, but finish my school there. And so randomly, I just looked around on the internet and found a cheap apartment for myself, that my mother would naturally pay for. And off I went. We just dumped the mattress there in that apartment and just a few items of furniture, and I was ready to go. I was on my own. Now, the high school I ended up going to, because of the district I was in, was Walnut Ridge High School. And I have to tell you that I really stood out. I really stood out at this Walnut Ridge High School because I was the only white person there. Well, you see, that's not entirely an exaggeration. In every single class I was in, I was the only white person there, and the only other white student I remember was the guy who introduced me to the school. They just said, hey, let's see if we can find the one white guy to show this new white guy around here. And he just and then I never saw this motherfucker again. Where the fuck did he go? He fucking vanished somewhere as I was walking through the halls nowhere. But it was all fine. In fact, my stepfather trolled me a little bit, or just joked. He said, oh, Ivan, you're going to be a minority here. But I was no more or less a minority here than I was at my upper middle class school. I wasn't at home with those white people either back there. And so, I was just fine. I was fine in that school. It was all good and dandy. I just did my kind of Eminem shit, just stay in the back of the bus, do my little raps, just keep out of the way, man. Don't cause fucking waves. Fucking, your 8 Mile is gonna come or whatever the fuck. No, I'm just joking around. Everybody was cool. Everybody was nice. Nobody bothered me at Walnut Ridge High School except for this one guy who tried to rob me. I was standing outside now, waiting for the bus. And this kid comes over. He says, empty all your pockets and give me all your money. Empty all your pockets, give me all your money. He had his hand extended, and even his whole kind of cadence of his voice sounded like this was in fact like a automated message you hear after calling an accountant or something. It wasn't that profoundly intimidating to me. Every third person in that school could kick my ass. And that's I'm probably lowballing it. But not this skinny motherfucker. And I was like, I don't have any money. And I just walked away. So that was my last time somebody tried to rob me. Most of the successful robberies of myself happened back in Russia. It usually started out with give me a ruble. It's pointless to give anybody a ruble, man. Nobody literally asks for a ruble unless they want to rob you. They just want you to start taking out your money or to test your reaction or whatever. A ruble is a pointless denomination. It's like 1/60th of a dollar today or something like that. Back then in Russia it was even less probably, I don't fucking know. Going back the memory lane, I decided to read student reviews of Walnut Ridge High School. Some sourpuss declared Walnut Ridge High School to be a horrible place to be white and racist and whatever. Well, fuck that attitude. That fucking school was fucking awesome. That school was awesome because one thing about it is that attendance was optional. That is to say, every other day I would make up some bullshit note from my parents and just excuse myself for the rest of the week. So I just showed up there twice a week or something like that. There was one hot girl there. Well, no, there were a lot of attractive ladies, but there was one hot girl there that I remember to this day. I have nothing more. I have nothing more to say about that matter, but this was one of the reasons why this school was fucking awesome. There are a lot of things going on there, like shootings in its surroundings, and I guess folks were breaking into cars and smoking marijuana there in parked cars. So this was Walnut Ridge High School. It was fucking wild. Now recently these reviews said that now there is uniforms and attendance is monitored very closely. What a bummer, man. Fucking Walnut Ridge High School, I love that fucking school. The best school I ever went to. It is around that time that I distinctly remember sitting in a bus stop and remembering that old anti-drug slogan. This slogan is before my time, but nevertheless, I remembered it for some reason, sitting there. And the slogan is, don't do drugs, get high on life. Get high on life. And as one is prone to do when you spend all of your time alone, I actually laughed at my own thought. And my thought was, hey, you know, it really works for me. I don't know why other people do drugs. I get high on life. I get high on life. It was really amusing to me that this slogan was correct. Now, unfortunately, I wasn't exactly getting high on life in the sense of life that most people understand it. You see, at this point, my mania was really spreading its wings. Hypomania, not full-scale mania, kind of this very intense and pleasant high, was beginning to shape me and define my life. My whole brain was morphing into an organic crack pipe. And the reason why mania feels so sweet, I think, is because all the other drugs are external to you. They come in, they're aliens in your brain, and then they leave you. Whereas mania lives in your brain. Bipolar, it's like there's a bipolar octopus who resides in your brain, and sometimes it sucks all the energy out of you during a depression, and it feasts on you. And then for some reason it spreads its tentacles into the crevices of your brain that it knows very intimately. And it starts giving you the shit, giving you that mental crack. Mania is a Marxist high. You own the means of production. Unfortunately, you don't control them at all. And for the next 4 years of my life, I would almost entirely be defined by mania. I consider it the best time of my life, not because of any social interactions, of which there were few, not because I've went to any parties, I did at the very end of it, but no. I felt that way because there was a great sense of momentum, a great sense of promise and adventure. I was consumed by it, I lived it almost every day. And it was, again, very odd to discover when I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. It was very odd to discover that these 4 years of my life that I consider to be so powerful and precious and so kind of defining, were defining in a different way. That they were once again a symptom of a mental illness. It was an odd thing to realize, an odd thing to confront that in a sense I still confront kind of to this day. I spent a lot of my time in this new apartment reading by candlelight. Now, I didn't have to read by candlelight, presumably. Presumably, I could have gotten a lamp. But since the apartment didn't have a lamp to begin with, I just bought some candles. And I would read by candlelight. I was really into politics at that time, so I would read, I don't know, fucking history and biographies of different political leaders. I would read like philosophy, but more like shitty philosophy, like Nietzsche, and I would read Russian classics, Dostoevsky, etc. As I was reading this, I almost got almost like sexually excited. I mean, things were going on in my head, and I really got really excited by these ideas. It's even too stupid to recount, because of course, you know, you have that kind of flow going through you, you have that electricity, that sense of momentum. You're not just reading these ideas, you're gonna fucking go out into the world eventually and change it with these ideas. So I was really supercharged. And at the end of that, one of these sessions, you know, I finally like went to bed. I don't know how late it was, probably like in the middle of the night, whatever. Suddenly, as I was laying in my bed, man, I felt the presence. I felt that there was a presence in the room. I looked at the wall, and even though I didn't actually see anything, I felt a presence. And the presence that I felt was this woman with her hair obstructing her face and kind of raising up, you know, kind of this posture. And this was before these kind of horror movies that we're all thinking about now. This was before that reference. In fact, I think it was based around this apparition in my head, was based around a Tarkovsky movie, a scene there. This presence was extremely powerful. And it was almost like some sort of a mother goddess, like nature, but not in a benevolent way, just kind of in a sinister way. Like sort of, you go into a forest and it has curiosity about you, but it can kill you or let you continue further. Like the whole kind of atmosphere around me was very charged at that time. I mean, this presence, this woman, she was amoral. She didn't care one way or the other, but she had a kind of a curiosity around her. It was almost like this warm, kind of sinister, I don't know, presence of nature. Like, I don't have proper words to describe it. Now, I didn't actually see anything, but I stared at the wall, and almost, as I would later, I almost willed myself to see something, but I didn't. This was not hallucinations, visual or auditory was not one of my traits. Unlike delusions of grandeurs and psychosis of that type, I never actually saw something, even though on a few occasions in my life I really wanted to see the beings that I was communicating with telepathically, or at least through prayer and karmic connection. But no, close but no cigar, not with that case. But I do definitely remember that event, and it will stay with me forever, I assume. Now, I didn't do shit in school, and therefore deductive reasoning would lead you to believe that my grades were shitty, which they were. So I wouldn't be able to enter a university right away, and instead I went to a community college, Columbus State Community College, before I would transfer to the Ohio State University and obtain my useless political science degree. At this Columbus State Community College, I really stood out. I was really the shining star of that institution, because even though I was very shy socially, for some reason I was not really that shy as far as talking in class when it comes to class-related matters, as far as like answering questions and giving my opinions. And this will lead me on a quick little tangent. And the tangent is this. It is interesting how social awkwardness sometimes is compartmentalized, fucking divided in a single individual, where public life is completely processed completely differently from interactions one-on-one with a person. And that's definitely the way it is with me to this day. That is to say, if I go to like a fast food place and the person there is kind of rude to me, maybe in a very subtle way, I can reflect on this like 4 hours later on throughout the day. However, when it comes to like this channel, one time I stumbled on a YouTube video where this YouTuber was talking about how you shouldn't be afraid of trolls, and somebody wrote in the comment section that for years I was afraid of starting my channel because I was afraid of criticism from strangers, from other people, and this fucking never occurred to me once when I started this channel, even though because of my constructive criticism of a lot of YouTube intellectual and luminaries like Jordan Peterson and Stefan Molyneux, I've been basically called every name in the book. And I can't say that I never had a comment that hurt my feelings a little bit, but nevertheless, like, it never occurred to me. And in the same way, like, for some reason I didn't have any problem debating the instructors at this community college. I was still very much committed to Sigmund Freud. And so when, my psychology instructor started disputing his theories and criticizing, I had to leap in there. So here at this point in the presentation, I will start showing a lot of pictures, a lot of selfies I took at the time. Now you have to remember that this was what, like 2004 to 2008. Smartphones were not at all widespread and didn't exist for part of that period. The only social media I remember was MySpace, and I was not active on it. So why did I take hundreds of selfies of myself in different poses? I mean, you can take a wild guess what inspired this bout of narcissism and self-documentation. But anyway, the only reason I bring this up is to say that I don't justify taking selfie after selfie of yourself for years and storing them and showing them to nobody aside from yourself reviewing them for some reason. I don't condone it. I don't do it anymore. But back in the day, it was a thing. Literally, almost nobody has seen these, and here they are. Here they are. I might as well use them in this video. I learned a lot at this community college. I can't deny it. I had a lot of fun there. And for the type of an institution that it is, I think it's pretty cool. There were a lot of instructors there who were much better than the professors I had at an actual university. My fucking proudest moment there happened during a psychology class. The instructor asked me to look around the room, look around the classroom, and look at everybody there. And then when I was done, he asked, what type of glasses is Bob wearing? And I said, he's not wearing any glasses. And everybody was like, ooh. And, he looked at me with, with surprise. Anyway, it was just a test about suggestibility, about the flexibility of memory. And I fucking caught that motherfucker, and I was the fucking king of this fucking community college for that moment. A philosophy professor told me there, a philosophy instructor, whatever the fuck, he told me that when I was away, the girls there were talking about how smart and attractive I was. And what an awesome place, this fucking community college. I guess this gave me the confidence to actually ask out a girl for the first time. You see, back in the days, there was actually no Netflix or high-speed internet as we know it today. And in order to watch movies, I actually had to go to a public library. And there was a pretty sweet public library there in Columbus, Ohio, the main one, and I would walk there. And there was a librarian there, and she was also a student in one of my classes, I think the creative writing class. One time she was smoking outside. I actually passed her a note and fucking scattered it away. And she was nice enough to reply in an email that she had a boyfriend. Nothing like this has ever happened before with me. I was just very, very emo. I was very devastated. I actually bought a bottle of Southern Comfort. So this is how moronic and kind of isolated it was. For one, I just thought it was going to be some sort of a sweet alcoholic drink or something. I didn't realize that it was going to taste like shit, at least for me. And so I couldn't even fucking enjoy the fucking Southern Comfort. I was so depressed, so kind of emo over this shit. Now, this was such a powerful event that I actually stopped going to that public library. It was too painful for me to go and to confront her there. Confront her. So I stopped going to this library. I started going to another library. But before all of this happened, I already was scheming to understand the ladies. And this is one of the most goofiest thing I've ever done. Almost like, in addition to bipolar, I'm also autistic. That's kind of how it sounds, because I really wanted to understand women. And so I decided to watch that shitty fucking HBO show, fucking Sex and the City. And not only did I watch a couple of these horrible fucking episodes, but I watched the whole fucking series. I watched the whole of Sex and the City. Now, I haven't seen the movies, but I did see the whole series. And I actually kind of got into it, and I would watch it alone, and the music came on, and I had my little dance, like, do, 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 whatever, I forget it now. I'm sure I had the melody back in the day. guess how that worked out for me as far as connecting with women. It fucking didn't work. All that time was fucking wasted. All that time was wasted. However, I was really happy to see Mikhail Baryshnikov appearing in the fucking final seasons of Sex and the City. It was like one of the few times when, you know, like a Russian was not presented as a villain. Here he was like as a fucking sex symbol. However, he really was a really shitty wooden actor. And I fucking, you know, I don't know if I was rooting for him to get Carrie or whatever the fuck.
Well, it's very red downstairs.
Sadly, is what expected of Russia.
So what's all this?
Potatoes with little dill, herring, beet salad, more red, veal and aspic.
What exactly is aspic? Kind of a meat jello?
Try it. It's yummy.
Do you always eat this late at night?
I usually work all night. For me, it's not late.
You work all night painting?
Yeah, painting, sculpture, whatever.
Anyway, so yeah, this was, there are certain things I can't blame on bipolar disorder. There are certain things in my life I can't blame on it, and this is unfortunately one of it.
Painting, sculpture, whatever.
And yet there was something else in my life that was much more important than ladies. Yes, way more important than even ladies and watching Sex and the City to understand them. That thing was hypomania. It was the highs of bipolar disorder. Now, obviously I didn't think of them as such, but they were at the core of who I was at college. They were a center of my world, the gravitational center of my existence, even if I didn't completely comprehend it at the time. Ideas and pleasant sensations were circling through me all the time. But there was a definite catalyst, a definite ritual that took me to the highest, really took me to the fucking sky. And this ritual involved pacing around in circles like you were insane, in fact. Pacing around in circles for hours like a caged animal. At the time, I used to listen to a lot of music, but the music that really did it for me to get things going was rap. I would put on rap and I would start shuffling around.
This is what it feels like when you're manic.
I would just start shuffling around my room, and over time, that shuffle would kind of resemble almost a tribal dance. Now, this would be a horrible, shitty tribal dance with no rhythm, and in fact, kind of the presentation, the metaphor of the tribal dance I'm going to use right now, I'm sure is simplistic and incorrect, etc. But basically, as my energy would increase, as my kind of submersion into this would increase, I would kind of shuffle around more and more, do little dances and shuffle around, kind of sometimes break out in dances as I would be listening to music. And as this was happening, in the same way that in my stupid tribal dance metaphor, not maybe in the real dance, but in the stupid tribal dance metaphor that I have in my head, I'd put on different masks. That is to say, different grandiose ideas about my future would appear. And I would put on one after another. And they were pretty, like becoming the mayor of Seattle, then becoming a famous kind of film director. And suddenly I was kind of living within my film, within my movie, and reenacting different parts, and saying different dialogue, and maybe writing something down, and then returning to this dance. You know, and I would just shuffle around, and all these ideas, all of this kind of, all of these sensations were circling through me in this tribal, in this fucking shuffle, in this tornado. And this would go on and on. If it was a usual performance, then it would end at these delusions. That is to say, I would put on one of these masks, be submerged into one of these fantasies, and then would walk away with the idea that this was what was going to happen. But at the greatest fucking pinnacles of this thing, at the greatest sort of orgasmic catalysts of this fucking shuffling, of this bipolar dance, what would happen is this: so many masks would come and go, then in the end I just felt a kind of a pure synergy with kind of existence. Then ironically, even though this would start out as a kind of a selfish thing, a kind of self-centered thing, if I really went deep into it, I would abandon it. And I would just kind of be consumed by this energy. I mean, this happened very, very rarely, but when it did, it was fucking awesome. I would just kind of sit down after it, like after sex I didn't experience at the time, but kind of like after sex I would just have this kind of a sense of relief and a sense of deep kind of satisfaction, and I would be sweating. Now this happened in various forms, would go on for hours. Like there would be times when I would fucking dance the night away alone. Dance the night away. There were other times when it would last just for like an hour or two. This would happen every other day. I mean, I don't have an exact chart of when this happened, but this would happen every week. This was the center of my life. This was the center of my life. And guess who didn't like my tribal dance? And there was the neighbors downstairs. And I would change apartments throughout my college and later. And in every single apartment where I lived above somebody, they would complain or note the fact that there was noise coming from upstairs, because each and every day I would walk around in circles. And the house where I am right now is no different. My parents consistently complain about me shuffling around and love them, and I was moved to a small room because of it, because of Ivan's bipolar shuffle. During this time, I also had what I now call the unrecognized genius speed walk. I had this game, when the class was over, I had to be the first person out of there. I don't know what the point of this game. Usually, unless somebody had to use the restroom, I always won it. Now this didn't facilitate any kind of social interactions with anybody, and then I would get out of the building and I just kind of speed walk back to my house. Like I never had anywhere I really needed to go unless I was going to school. I didn't have a job because I didn't have the legal permit to work at that time. And so I would just kind of speed walk everywhere, and I would just walk around Columbus, walk around the campus, and just kind of run home almost, fucking walking very fast. And during this time too, because when I found the class stimulating, that kind of intellectual stimulation, even a minor one, it would just kind of trigger this process, a flood of thoughts. Because again, because I was manic so much of the time, or had a manic disposition, when you hear an idea, the question is, how could it filter through you into the world, right? How can you work with this idea, because you're kind of chosen. You're basically a little bit chosen in a way. Now, I certainly wouldn't describe myself that way back in the day, but there was a sense of a special mission, a sense of a special destiny. You're not like the rest, Ivan. You're not like the rest. And so even a little bit of kind of this intellectual stimulation at some political science class at the community college would just kind of, get me going, and then I would fucking run home, where I would fucking pace like a lunatic. This was my life. So these experiences were obviously very pleasurable, but at the time I didn't process them as a high. That is to say, I thought that there was momentum in my life. So have you ever watched a documentary about some period, maybe in the 1960s, people being involved in the civil rights movement, or just kind of being involved in some project together, being a part of history, and they describe this sense of unity and the sense of momentum, the sense of being a part of something bigger than yourself? Well, this is something that I was experiencing by myself without anybody else present. Just my own little momentum, and that which was bigger than myself was my destiny, of course. It was my destiny. And there was always the sense of destiny, even when I really didn't have a well-articulated idea about what I was going to do with my life. Different ideas, different kind of mayor of Seattle, different political careers, different different possibilities, different kind of fantasies would switch very rapidly, but the sense of momentum never left you. And so when I was pacing around, when I was having these experiences, I thought that it was like training, that this was the training period for something else, for the moment where these experiences are actually going to merge with the outside world. So obviously they never did. They obviously never did merge with the outside world, but I nevertheless at the time didn't process them as something, as a point of gravity, as the center of my life, because I thought that I was going to spin out of them into my great and awesome future.
Last night I journeyed backwards in time to the medieval world of Dark Tower. In this amazing game, I had to find 3 keys, lay siege to the tower, and defeat the enemy within. Each move was a challenge. The computer kept track, giving me secret information, pictures, sounds, surprises. Then, ahead of my opponent, I made my move. The battle was joined, and I was victorious. Dark Tower.
Say, my friend, do you ever feel alienated from the world, alienated from society? You smile at your neighbors and they smile back at you. But do they actually remember your name? Would they actually help you at a time of need? Are you truly connected with other human beings? Are you truly connected with your family, with your loved ones, with people who you had relationships with before, who have now become just basically avatars on your neglected Facebook page? Do you ever feel this kind of all-consuming sense of alienation and a lack of purpose? Do you have a sense that it is very difficult to lead a spiritual life in the modern society, where spirituality has been joined, interconnected permanently with consumerism, where Nike, Apple, and others sell their products as if they were a form of communion, a form of elevating humanity by giving them money? Does this ever bring any vomit into your throat? Does this life seem hollow? Just one cycle of consumerism after another until you fucking die. Would you like to connect with a spiritual tradition that is 2,500 years old? Would you? Would you like to join our Buddhist society, the Buddhist Dominion? Some people consider it to be the answer for humanity's woes, while others consider it a cult. Either way, guess who's in charge? The Buddhist Dominion would be organized like a mandala. It would have an outer core. The outer core would be the regular kind of temples, the regular Dharma centers, where if you're new to Buddhism, you can go in there, learn about meditation, learn about Buddhism, and do some basic practices. Now, at the next layer to the outer layer, there would be the people who lived within the dominion. That is to say, they would be lay people who could have children and sex, but they would be restricted in the things they could do, like they would be somewhat detached from the outside world. Not as far as like the Hasidic Jews and the Amish, but somewhat detached. There would be prohibitions against excessive use of television, the internet. Everything would be centered around living within the dominion, making the dominion flourish, and practicing the Dharma, with the idea that it is difficult to practice the Dharma in the modern world, surrounded by all the excesses of modernity, all the distractions. And here you make a voluntary decisions to enter into the dominion and advance the lineage of teachings, and also to practice yourself and reinforce this society so that future generations could enjoy this. And at the very core of the inner dominion, at the very core of it, would be the monasteries and the monastics. Okay, so this is how the structure would be created. The way it would function is that there would be the capital. The capital I was thinking about, like Pacific Northwest of the United States. And then there would be regional capitals of the Dominion with governors. And then around these regional capitals, which would be cosmopolitan by the standards of the society, that is to say, there would be like a theater there would be some forms of, I don't know, Buddhist entertainments, that's where the festivals would be held. And then there would be villages or little cities governed by mayors, where people would live in small communities, practice the Dharma with a temple. And then different Buddhist teachers from outside or within the dominion would travel around it, going from the inner dominion, from the villages, maybe to the regional capitals, to the temples. And people from the temples, if they were ready to enter the dominion, they would go in there. And presiding over this administrative class would be me, the head of the dominion. The dominion head. So in all the interviews I anticipated having with different reporters like Megyn Kelly, when Megyn would ask me, Ivan, are you running a cult? I would say, if I am, it's the best cult in the world. And then I would say, no. You know what, Megyn? I haven't invented a religion. In fact, I'm just the administrative head of this organization. The religion we practice have been around for 2,500 years. I have not altered it in any way whatsoever. In fact, under our rules that I would invent, of course, and codify myself, under our rules, I am prohibited from appearing at any temple and preaching and teaching the Dharma. I'm not qualified. I am a bad Buddhist. I'm a bad meditator. Okay, I'm not qualified. I have too much anger. I have too many issues to be a qualified Buddhist teacher. I'm just the administrative head. I'm prohibited from writing religious books. It is prohibited to study any potential religious books that I could write. We have our own qualified masters. We have our own monasteries that are currently, as we speak, are nourishing qualified lamas. I'm just the administrative head. This is not a cult. People are free to leave. People are free to go. We're not dragging anybody to join us. In fact, in order to gain access into the inner dominion, you have to pass multiple tests. We have to look at your credit score. In fact, a lot of the dominion is designed so somebody like me wouldn't get in, because once you're in the inner dominion, we really want you to get along with everybody else and have a good work ethic. So strangely enough, I was completely cognizant that a person like myself would have to be in the outer dominion, unfortunately. Well, anyway, of course I would control religion in the dominion. I wouldn't be a mere administrator, even though officially there would be a line of separation between religion and the administrators. De facto, I would control it through money, and I would make all the appointments therein. And I thought about this dominion very deeply, very deeply. There were multiple court levels. There were multiple courts. One is the Sangha court to judge like religious crimes. However, as the Sangha court is presiding, there is the Dominion court presiding as well on top of it, basically seeing if there is anything that could violate the laws of the Dominion that may not violate the religious law. Or sometimes they could come to different conclusions. Like, let's say a monk has been accused of sexual harassment of ladies, right? And so then the Sangha court says, no, we're not going to expel him from the Sangha, right? And so the administrative court, the court of the Dominion, is separate from the religious court, okay? They're separate, okay? And so the administrative court cannot expel this monk, cannot make him not be a part of the Sangha. However, the Dominion court has the right to expel him from the Dominion, from the inner dominion into the outer world. That is to say, it can disrobe him, it can expel him. And so there would be a monastery for fucking monks like him in the middle of nowhere in Montana, where I would send his ass. Because the whole Dominion court and the Sangha court are just bullshit that I secretly control from behind the scenes. Basically, it would be like Putin's Russia for the benefit of all sentient beings, with me at the core of it. The Dominion would be a micronation, but I would always tell the people, we're not like the other nations. Other nations are defined by xenophobia, by the hatred of other. They're defined by an attachment to the land. Whereas in the case of us, of our society, we're actually committed to preserving the teachings of the Buddha. And we're totally defined by this, not by the land we possess, not by the buildings, but by the lineage of one qualified master passing on the teaching to the next one. Okay? So we're kind of an ethereal nation, a nation above all others. Okay? So this is what we do. There would be a Dominion unified forces. And you might ask, a military organization? Dude, no. Just a series of charities that follow military guidelines and discipline, right? So there would be a parade where the announcer would say the Dominion fucking Medicinal Corps, and they would salute, and then there would be a presentation of how many people they have healed, etc. The Dominion Veterinary Corps, the Dominion Corps of Engineers that would build like homes for the poor, and also some borderline commercial projects for the Dominion Treasury, okay? So this is what's going on. There would be the Dominion Guards, which would be like security guards, but also a little bit like police, examining the people in the Dominion, okay? And there would be the High Guards, which would be like the Dominion KGB, that would, spy and see whether the officials are behaving. There would be the Dominion Harmony Laws, okay? Based on a combination of Confucian ethics, the idea of harmony in a society, but also Western rights. Is it explicitly forbidden to criticize Ivan in the harmony laws? Of course not. Why? Why would it be there? However, what disharmony can it cause, man? We gotta boot your ass now. You've been yapping too much. Should I continue with this? This is the Buddhist Dominion. This is an example of a manic fantasy I had. Except I didn't have it more than 10 years ago in college. Nope, I just had it like a week ago. In fact, I was preoccupied with this Dominion fantasy for weeks. I couldn't get rid of it. I couldn't fucking get rid of it. It wasn't a fully formed bipolar delusion, because at this point when I was fucking building the Dominion, I knew exactly what it was. I knew it was a manic spike. So I wasn't kind of completely convinced. I didn't believe this was going to happen. I thought this was ridiculous. But that kind of irrational part of your brain was waging a losing battle there. It is just this, the parasite, the octopus was releasing fucking this honey, the sugar of the Dominion, into my brain. And my sense of meaning in the world escalated rather fucking rapidly. And suddenly, how can I work on my shitty little YouTube channel? Why would I fucking work on it when I could be at the intersection of centuries-old teachings of the Buddha? If I can reinvent Western Buddhism, if I can create a Shangri-La right here in the West, and of course the Dominion would be closed off from the outside world most of the time, except for certain like recruitment or like, you see? And kind of to come down from that into, editing little videos when you make fun of YouTube personalities, it feels so petty. It feels so shitty and lame. Dave Rubin, man, that fucking blank stare of wisdom. I mean, Jesus, it's just like a mannequin looking at you, but one who wants reasonable discourse, all right? That's that guy. Then there's the Professor Jordan, guess how much I make on Patreon, because I ain't telling no more. Peterson, I mean, he really kind of feeds us the wisdom here on the intellectual dark web. Very dark, very profound. It's Jordan Peterson, my dudes. I wanted to get rid of it. I wanted to push it out of my psyche. But sometimes as I was driving in my van, all of a sudden I would just lapse into speeches as the head of the Buddhist Dominion. Why? Why do we favor Tibetan Buddhism above all else? Why do we discourage the learning from other traditions? Well, listen up, guys. Listen here. When you take up an exercise regimen, do you do it and then take up a different form of exercise? It's going to cause confusion. You're not going to improve. All traditions are equal. All of them have a path to enlightenment. But we have to focus. We have to focus on Tibetan Buddhism and develop this tradition. That's the problem with the West. Everybody's too scatterbrained. They're just kind of into intellectual masturbation. You see, And I would start saying this when I was driving. So this is now. Now, thankfully, through the work of lithium and hopefully kind of normalized the sleep cycles, this dominion was pushed out of my brain rather recently. Like around a week ago, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Now, even if I wanted to think about it, I can't start it up. And in fact, as I was anticipating filming this video, while I was still heading the Dominion, reviewing this would be the most painful thing of all. And not because it's embarrassing that it's happening right now. No, the reason it would be difficult for me to review this is because a small part in the back of my head still believed at that time that this was feasible. A small part of my head wanted me to shut down this channel and start kind of recruiting for the Buddhist society that would then sprawl into my Buddhist empire. So this happened now with lithium in the picture, with the diagnosis in the picture. And actually, nothing like this has happened in the 2 years, and this is the first time that this has happened. And yet, even with all of this, I still didn't have control over it. I was still seduced by it. I still fucking took the ride, even when I didn't want to do it. I was seduced into doing it. However, back then in college, obviously I wasn't on lithium. Obviously I wasn't diagnosed. And I was completely consumed by this. This wasn't just something I tried to push out of my head. This is something I welcomed within me. Mania, like all other drugs, stimulate your reward systems. And when your reward systems are stimulated, with nothing going on, with no connection with reality, well, you don't do anything in the outside world. I wanted to be with a lady, but I didn't want it so much. I didn't want it so much because I was having such a great time pacing around for hours, day after day. I was building the city of Seattle, where I could also go on about the ideas that I had for it, like an organic bureaucracy that responds to the needs of the people, like periodic polling of the population about the priorities of their neighborhood, and that the money would be automatically then allocated in that direction, a portion of the money. You don't want people to make the decision. The emphasis educational system, where instead of taking tests, you would take assessment for skills 4 times during the school year, and then your schedule would be readjusted so that your skills could be matched. So basically, if you have low skills in math, in your next quarter, math would be your first subject. Fucking A, dude. This is my lithium medication making noise. I can take it right here. I have the fucking water bottle. It's... Fuck it. You know, I was consumed with that shit. It was the totality of my life. I had zero insight. I had zero perspective. And therefore, I had nothing practical whatsoever happen. You know, I made no real practical plans for the future. I just performed in the same lackluster way in college that I did in school. I just continued on my merry way into my glorious future. The one thing I didn't experience a lot of in my college years was depression. In fact, I hardly experienced any depression during that time frame. I had periods where I didn't want to live, or down periods, but they weren't intense enough and they weren't disruptive enough to really kind of classify as depression, in my mind at least. I don't remember ever being kind of detached from the world in a psychological sense. Of course, I was detached from the world on account of kind of being manic and living in my own world, but as far as really kind of feeling that disconnect, fundamental disconnect with existence, that sense of incohesion with life, I didn't experience that. So since nobody could possibly give a shit about this, let me list some reasons why I think I didn't experience depression in college. So reason number 1 is just the progression of bipolar disorder. I mean, bipolar disorder just means the deregulation of mood. It doesn't mean a deregulation of mood on a specific schedule or with a specific pattern that's going to emerge at the very outset. No, it really doesn't owe you anything there. I mean, in my case, I just had this period, a strange 4-year-long period, where the very dominant thing was hypomania, and depression really didn't make a huge entrance at all. And this is why at no point in college could I possibly conceive of myself as being mentally ill, or did I seek treatment at that point whatsoever. The second reason has to do with this. Now, one of the jobs during which I was the happiest and the most psychologically stable in my life happened, I think, about a year ago now. I'm pretty absent-minded. I forget the dates. Yeah, it was slightly over a year ago. And for 6 months, I worked as a driver, a cargo van driver, and I delivered parcels. Currently, I fucking deliver auto parts, but back then I actually delivered parcels to post offices in rural Ohio. So check out my schedule. I would have to be there at 5:30 in the morning, and then they would shift it to 4:30 in the morning. That means that I would have to get up at first at like 4 a.m., 4:30 a.m., and then at 3:30 a.m. And this was 6 days a week. Now, what this did to me, even though it sounds like a horrible schedule, and it definitely fucking was, but what it did to me is it forced me into a consistent sleep cycle. I simply didn't have an option. Normally, my sleep cycle is what I'm experiencing right now, which is I'm filming right now at midnight. I started filming at midnight because that's when my energy peaks. However, at that point, I really didn't have an ability to do that. It was impossible at that point. And yet, however, I also wasn't able to go to bed at like whatever it would take, like 9 p.m. or whatever. So what I did instead is that I got home from work during the afternoon, take a nap for 4 hours, and then go on with my day, and then go to sleep at like 11:30 or 10:30. Pretty late considering when I had to get up, but that was the compromise I had to make with my natural predisposition, and then sleep another 4 hours or so. So I would get my 8 hours of rest, and they were consistent 6 days a week. And so when I had that consistent sleep cycle, I was forced into mental stability. I mean, I really was the most mentally stable and kind of content more than I have been in years. However, I really couldn't keep up with the schedule otherwise. I mean, I really had no time or for anything else. Now, back in my college days, of course, I didn't have these restraints. Maybe I had a few morning classes, but overall, my schedule was pretty free. In fact, I fucking defined it. And as a result of it, I was able to maintain my natural sleep pattern. That is to say, to go to bed in the middle of the night, 4 a.m. to 5 a.m., and then wake up in the afternoon. And I think that contributed to my stability. And in fact, now that the Buddhist Dominion didn't work out and all my other manic fantasies didn't work out, one of my biggest kind of dreams in life is to actually have a job where I could do that. I could have my natural schedule and to see whether it would improve my mood. Because right now I have to rely on this stuff. You know, so this is my caffeine pills with which I just jumpstart myself repeatedly throughout the day, and these are my sleeping pills. Like if you want a nice caffeine pill, get one with L-theanine or whatever it is. Anyway, it makes everything smoother, L-theanine. Makes everything smoother and nice, doesn't give you those caffeine jitters. So right now, for example, as my energy levels begin to peak into the night, I'll have to shut myself down with some sleeping pills, and then in the morning I might pop a caffeine pill, but it depends on my schedule when I pop them or not. A lot of times I will take a caffeine pill after I wake up during the nap I didn't want to take in the middle of the day. Anyway, so one of the things with bipolar disorder is people with bipolar disorder have poor regulation of sleep cycles. In fact, there are experts who believe that this is the very cause of this mood disorder, is poor regulation of sleep cycles, and that these mood stabilizers and lithium help stabilize your sleep cycle. If you yourself for some reason are feeling down, check if your sleep cycle has been interrupted. One of the reasons people hate Mondays, could be the reason, is because they're restarting a sleep cycle that they have abandoned during the weekend, and for the same reason why people often have lazy Saturdays. So if you're interested in maximizing your mood, you might want to try just having a 100% sleep cycle that you maintain 7 days a week. And the final reason is just the lack of stress. Not only was I getting a normal sleep cycle for myself, but also there was hardly any stress in my life. As I said, I didn't do shit in college, and yet I was able to advance. I didn't have any social relationships to stress me out. I was high all the time in my head, and I just kind of lived in my own insular world, and there was no kind of stress that then depression could be an overreaction to. And finally, I was just young. People who commit suicide tend to be older, and in fact, the older I get, the more kind of tangible the idea becomes, even if it was present with me my whole, well, much of my life, let's say. I'm not saying I'm gonna kill myself, okay? I'm not saying, but it's just becoming more concrete, because aside from being manic, there's just the mania of youth. There is just this belief, a lack of fatalism, right? A lack of constraints. Everything is possible. Everything people tell young people in the West now is basically manic in and of itself. You can be anything you want to be. The world is full of opportunities, even if it isn't. But there is a lack of a sense of confinement and fatalism. You're not cornered at that age, generally speaking. Some people are, but I certainly wasn't. So yeah, I mean, I think for all these reasons probably, but primarily because of the first one, is why I didn't have depression when I was in college. While not having to deal with depression during my college years, there is something else that I got to experience. Yes, those were panic attacks. About a third of people with bipolar disorder experience panic attacks. It's kind of you're at an elevated risk, and I was one of that third of my bipolar brothers and sisters. Throughout my college years and into my early 20s, I think I had a total of like 4 or 5 panic attacks. I no longer remember all of them, so I'll just recount 3 of them and just group them together, even though the last one happened when I was in Seattle. So the first one I remember, and I think this was the first one that actually happened to me, was my mother was visiting me during freshman year in college, actually at the community college, okay? And we were driving around Columbus, where suddenly I felt that I was having a heart attack. I actually started to hyperventilate. You know, it was just your standard issue panic attack. And she drove me to the hospital, to the emergency room, where naturally nothing was found. So that's the first panic attack that I'm going to mention. The second one I'll mention is I was leaving class at the community college, and all of a sudden I started kind of shaking. It seemed like the color of everything around me changed, and I started kind of feeling that I'm dying, that something is wrong with me, that something is happening. So I just, in an irrational way, actually headed to the nurses' building. Now, I thought that there could be a hospital there, but no, it was just an educational building. And some ladies there told me that. They said, we can't help you. Now, strangely enough, they didn't offer to call the ambulance or do anything like that, but whatever. Oh, fuck it. I guess the nurses don't take the Hippocratic Oath or whatever the fuck. But I still remember, because of the delusional nature of this, I thought I was profoundly sick. I still remember like being in an elevator, kind of freaking out, walking on the stairs, kind of looking for somebody to help me in this nurse's building. And then I left the building, and as I started walking away from it, I was heading to the hospital, but as I started going there, it faded away into nothing. And so it kind of ended, and that was that. And the last panic attack that I had, and that I will mention here, there were a couple more between these, but the last one that I had was in Seattle. And this was the most interesting of all the panic attacks that I've experienced, because I wasn't outwardly panicking, but internally the thoughts that were going on in my head were the most severe for these panic attacks. So I was heading to work in Seattle on a bus, when all of a sudden a thought occurred to me that I was gonna die. Now, this wasn't an existential thought, oh, we all eventually die. No, I thought I was gonna die right now. Like, I was dying. And I just went to another bus and was heading toward the hospital. And I still remember this kind of surreal atmosphere and scene, for myself at least, my subjective sense, because I was heading on this, to the hospital. I wasn't outwardly panicking, but it wasn't like I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was gonna die, and I was convinced I was gonna die. I thought, they're not gonna help me, and I'm just experiencing my last moments of life, and I should just kind of relax to the extent that I can and just take in the scenery before I go to the hospital, and I'm just gonna die there. So there's a kind of a Zen panic attack in a sense, but I was totally convinced that I was seeing the world for the last time, and so I was just kind of looking around at the beautiful scenery in Seattle, looking around at the people in the streets, convinced that this was the end. This was the end. And so once I got there, they checked me out, and I do remember for some reason there was a guy with like a tattoo of hammer and sickle and Trotsky, and this is like fucking Seattle for you, but he was a nice male nurse. And then I was released from there, and it all fucking went away. And that's the only interesting thing about panic attacks, is that once they're done, they're done. Like there's no, at least in my case, no trauma, no sort of, this isn't like depression that lingers in any way. You just feel that you're having a heart attack, you feel like you're dying, and then like whatever, a half an hour later, whatever it is, it's just gone. It actually kind of reminds me of mania in a way, because you can also be like severely deluded, believe that you're a reincarnation of a lama. And then just a few days later, it's completely gone, and you might even doubt the foundations of Buddhism. And a panic attack is kind of like this. However, they stopped. I didn't experience panic attacks. I've experienced things like being convinced for some reasons that close people to me are gonna die or kill themselves. Like I had this with my father. He offered to gift me his camera, his expensive camera at one point, and I was convinced that this was a sign of potential suicide. And with other people I cared about, I had these kind of external panic attacks, but they basically ceased, and I really didn't have one since the early 20s. While the panic attacks merely threatened me with phantom death, I really had a real intangible opportunity to get shot and die in my final year of college. Now, as we've discussed, my energy kind of peaks at night, so around midnight, I had a great idea to start cycling, to just take my bicycle and just ride around Columbus. It's so awesome. The weather is finally cool and nice, and there's nobody around. And I would just kind of ride around like from the university to downtown, and I mean ride around for like I think over an hour. I don't remember at this point anymore, but it was really awesome. It was time to reflect, and I would always, in anticipation of moving to Seattle after college, I also always listened to the podcasts from the independent radio station KEXP in Seattle, which are still around and I still recommend. On one of these days, this podcast from this hipster station potentially could have been the last thing I've heard. So what happened is that there is this bridge that I would ride under, the bike path goes under it. So I rode under it and went downtown, and then when I turned around back and came back to this bridge, there were cops all around. There were like a couple of squad cars there, and they told me to just take my bicycle elsewhere to walk around it. Next day when I read up about it, what happened is this. So I rode under this bridge, and then within a time frame of, as I remember now, of like 20-30 minutes, something like that, maybe even less, there was a car parked around there, and 3 men got out. 2 men kind of held the one guy, and they shot him. They killed him. Now, this was a stupid crime and an immoral crime, of course, but it was just Lady Fortune was not on their side, I guess. Because right as they shot him, a cop was driving over the bridge. I guess they didn't resist, and he apprehended them. Now, the guy who was killed, based on the newspaper article, seemed like a nice guy. He was, I believe, very young, under 20 years old. Had his whole life ahead of him, obviously. Was going to church, but I guess he got mixed up with the wrong crowd. So I really don't know much about it. I wish I did. At the time, I was in a creative writing class, and I naturally wrote a story about this. And one of my classmates actually said that her father is a criminal lawyer familiar with the case, and he said that they would have shot me, I guess, based on the information she provided. So I don't know. Well, fuck it. Let's stop talking about it already. Anyway, I wrote a story about it, and the interesting thing about this story was that I was kind of summarizing my college life and contrasting my life with the life of the person who got killed under that bridge. Just basically kind of projecting my life forward. And the strange thing about this essay, in retrospect, is just how sober it was. Because at the very end of this essay, I've kind of outlined the fact that I'm a goofy daydreamer, that I really don't know how to drive a car, I never really had a full-time job, and I'm just not ready for the world. That was it. And it was a stark contrast with the mania. A stark contrast with the mania that actually defined my life during this whole period. However, this sober attitude clearly didn't last. Because after I moved from Columbus to Cincinnati in order to then depart to Seattle from my mother's house, there was actually a windstorm in Cincinnati. There was a very powerful windstorm that knocked out electricity. And you could walk around and just feel this energy of nature. And of course, this awoke in me the recollection of my contact with nature in my bedroom, where she sort of presented herself as some eternal witch to me. And I really felt that this windstorm was a sign for me, sort of heading me off, blessing my journey to Seattle, which was clearly a world historical event. And it wasn't for nothing that I gathered up a few trinkets while I was still in Columbus and threw them off this bridge where the man was killed in some sort of a bizarre ritual. Now clearly these things were connecting for me. Things were looking up for me. I was being blessed. I was being fucking blessed by the winds. So let's review where 4 years of hypomania have gotten me. Number one, I was moving for Seattle solely for the reason that I liked Nirvana in high school. There was no other reason. Now this in and of itself might not be so insane, but hey, check this out. I was going to become a mayor of Seattle before going into the movie business or doing whatever the fuck I wanted to, because it's just in my nature to fucking excel, okay? And now I was also kind of blessed by these metaphysical winds. I was blessed by the winds of nature. And man, I was ready to go. The first thing that really surprised me about Seattle is that it's very hilly, kind of like San Francisco. You see, the city I was moving to, I hardly even researched it at all. I probably skimmed that part of the Wikipedia article about Seattle that said that it had hills. You know, it's like fucking Kurt Cobain didn't write the song Steep Hills of Seattle. Otherwise I would have known. You see, if they showed some of these hills on Frasier, I guess, during the few episodes that I watched, maybe it would have registered in my mind. As is, I was just surprised. Now, I didn't have a car, and so these hills, kind of walking around on them everywhere, I mean, really kind of kept the weight down considerably. And the second thing I was surprised about Seattle was the fact that there were no fucking jobs. There were hardly any jobs. So you see, the thing is that I graduated in 2008. So as you might recall, this was the peak of one of the biggest economic calamities in America and the world since the Great Depression. So there were very few jobs. And so the winds, the magical winds from Cincinnati, the winds of nature, carried me naturally into a position perfect for this economy. And I was working at the unemployment center for the state of Washington, taking in unemployment claims. I was hired because I'm bilingual, and there's a large Russian-speaking community in Washington state, and they needed bilingual agents. Because I wasn't legally able to work before, and now I was, this was really my first job in my life. And this was not kind of obviously the job suited for me, not for my great talents and ambitions. And so I really kind of didn't appreciate it, and I was just an idiot goofball. Like, I just kind of goofed around in there a lot. I really hated taking call after call. Kind of made me fucking miserable. So I played little pranks. I played little pranks and jokes at this government office. So check this out. If somebody was rude to me on the line, what I would do is I would print out a communist poster I would find online, like of Lenin saying, praising the glories of labor. I would just write some message underneath it, type it out, not write it by hand, and say, submit your 3 job logs a week, comrade. You're on the way to prosperity or something, and just send it with the official envelope, official Washington state envelope, to the person who has been rude to me on the phone. And then when I looked at the notes to their file, I actually saw that some of them did, encouraged by the poster of Vladimir Lenin that they received in the mail. They actually have submitted their job logs for examination. People are supposed to look for 3 jobs and every week and write down their logs, you know. But how about prank phone calls to people at the office? Why restrict yourself to the unemployed who rely on you for help? It's time to make some prank calls to the office. Now, this one, I'm sorry, it is politically incorrect, okay? And I was like young and stupid when I did it. I mean, okay, if there are any Native Americans watching this, I do apologize. So there was a claimant who called in to me, and he was kind of rude. He was Native American, and his name, I'll just kind of say, I'll just change it up, but it was kind of like White Bear, okay? That was his name. And so after I was done with him, I was just kind of in a dour mood because he was rude to me, and I decided to kind of get some levity, get some fun out of the whole situation. So then I did call back into the automated system. I redialed it, and I dialed the Russian line. And so after dialing the Russian line, it went on to an agent in another office, not the one in Seattle where it was working in. And so when he picked up, I entered the information from the guy, and I said in Russian, I said, "Hey, this is White Bear. Can I please speak to Black Bear?" Now I found this hilarious, and he was like, "Do you know where you're calling to?" Anyway, of course he didn't speak with an accent. That would make no fucking sense, since we were speaking in Russian. That make no fucking sense, all right? But yeah, this is kind of how I spent my time. I really didn't take anything very seriously, except for my growing depression. And this is when my kind of lifelong pattern that continues to this day emerged. So I had emo depression and despair in high school. Then I had hypomanic respite in college. And now my sort of natural pattern that really continued for most of my adult life emerged. And that is to say that for most of the year I would be depressed. Now, it doesn't mean that I was always miserable or always incapable of doing anything, but I would have mild to moderate depression. And then periodically I would have little periods of mania with the good old pacing around. And then at the beginning of the year and around spring, somewhere in that time frame, usually like from February to whatever April, I would start to peak again, and I really had a pleasurable moment of mania. I would be really kind of active during that time frame. And that has continued to me to this day. And now that I have been medicated, I no longer feel depressed, but I do have a lot of melancholy. A lot of the times I don't like to be alive. I'm more lethargic, blah, 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 all this kind of fucking sob shit. But yeah, I mean, it really started to emerge in Seattle. And I was trying to deal with this kind of new, more adult depression was new to me. And I really was looking for answers. Eventually, 4 potential potions revealed themselves as far as healing my depression. The number 1 was alcohol, which didn't work out. Number 2 was a lady, which made me crazy. Number 3 was religion, which made me ecstatic and insane. Number 4 was psychiatry, that completely fucking wrecked my life until it redeemed itself 7 years later. In my head, Seattle was supposed to be the continuation of the crazy momentum I had in college. I was looking for that. In fact, it was supposed to be the salvation city where my sort of aspirations and dreams would finally turn into reality. Now, naturally, this didn't happen because my aspirations and dreams were insane. Of course, it didn't fucking happen. But I was really depressed, and I was moping around the city. And very often I would go to like a Chinese restaurant, order a couple glasses of wine. And then I would go home and buy some beer and just basically try to get drunk as much as I could or consume as much alcohol as I could. Now, the one thing that whenever I die, nobody can put on my tombstone, Ivan didn't try to be an alcoholic, because I was miserable and I thought maybe alcohol will help. I really had no kind of long-term thinking about the consequences, and I really was trying to buy beer and trying to buy different shit to really get drunk. Now, in spite of any ethnic stereotypes you might have about Russians, with this Russian it just didn't fucking click. Like, alcohol never did anything for me. I mean, sometimes it made me a little kind of slap happy and act like a moron, but it never really muted fundamentally any kind of sad thoughts, didn't turn them off, didn't block them at their inner core. And so I just had this beer that I didn't drink, that would just kind of go to waste. And this happened throughout my life. I would buy alcohol to try to be an alcoholic, and then this fucking beer would just kind of sit in my freezer for years. I mean, in my fridge. That was it. So the number 2, of course, is a lady. Now, I have connected with a few ladies back in my college days, but I really didn't feel anything anything special for them. In my last year of college, I did become friends with some of them. One lady and I, we would watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer together, and I did enjoy watching it, but she had a kind of an emotional attachment to the show, it seems, that she didn't explicitly express, but she expressed it implicitly when she stopped inviting me to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer with her, because I would make sardonic remarks. So this kind of, we were still friends until recently. She was my first fucking American friend, the first real American friend that I made when I was like 22 or something, 10 years after I came here. But recently I unfriended her on Facebook because like I sent her a couple messages over the months, didn't receive any reply, and I fucking hate it. And so that was done. Now, however, I was able to meet a lady who really pulled at my heartstrings. In fact, she pulled exclusively on the craziest and the most fucking insane heartstring. I really was in love with this girl. I really became in love with her. I loved her so much that I even dedicated an insane cargo van video to her on this very channel. I don't know if you enjoyed this video, but I sure as fucking did. It was very fun. It was very fun driving with my friends, with my fucking subscribers. Yeah, sit on my lap, son. Sit on my lap. Sit on my lap, daughter. Fucking daughter first, dude. Ah, yes. We're reaching some sort of an apex here. Some sort of a climax. Something is gonna happen here, but nothing fucking ever does. But this is why I like driving, because it gives you a sense of motion. It is the only kind of, it's the only fucking thing in the world that consistently gives you a sense of fucking motion. Well, dude, turn off this video. Nothing's gonna happen, man. It's all fucking over. I told you about my love affair. I told you about my one-sided pain. I bled for you like Jesus. I have stigmata on my fucking large fucking hands, completely proportional to my fucking penis. Where can I fucking turn around in this hick town? Where can I turn around? And the same fucknuts who watched that insane video are fucking watching this right now. You yourself have to see a fucking qualified psychiatrist, dude. Why are you watching any of this shit? I met her off of this dating website, OkCupid. Back then, as is now, I refused to sort of appear like a normal person on there. Like, it's somehow beneath me to type out a normal fucking profile, so I go for the edgelord shit. And in that case, I pasted a passage from Nietzsche, which was called The Pale Criminal. And in fact, my whole profile was called The Pale Criminal. And The Pale Criminal describes this, it actually is stuck in my mind to this day. I think it's pretty interesting. It's basically describes an argument against the death penalty, because the criminal is represented as a kind of this bowl of slithering snakes. That is to say, his motivations are unclear for committing the crime. They're not linear. They're not something that you can explicitly punish. Well, anyway, I pasted this on the site, and for some reason she was into it, because she sent me a message. We met, we went to a restaurant, and then we went back to my house. Now, this never happened to me before, that is to say, kind of so soon, and I really kind of didn't know what to do there. I mean, I had this kind of a beautiful creature, I guess you could say, in my house, and wasn't sure. I was kind of overwhelmed by the idea that she wanted to stay the night. Well, anyway, we spent that time together. After some tender fucking kisses in the morning, I guess, she left, and with the full understanding that she was going to return. And then she fucking just vanished. I was fucking devastated. Again, I'm a loner, so any kind of entry into my life by another person, especially a woman, has a special kind of a real special power. And so she disappeared. I still remember this moment. 2 months later, I'm speaking with my dad on Skype, and suddenly a message from her pops up. And of course it was cryptic and tiny, as many of her messages were. But essentially she wanted to meet up again. We did meet up, and she picked me up on her car. We went to this, like an Asian market there. It was her and her like white trash lady friend. That we were sitting there and eating our food, and she had a little kind of band around her wrists. And she said, my boyfriend doesn't even notice this. And then she unveiled, and there were very kind of linear, very nice cuts on her wrists. Like, she's kind of half Asian, I guess, stereotypically, I guess, oh, fuck it, all right, okay, all right, okay, no geometric joke. Oh, okay, no, there was just kind of neat, okay, fucking neat, kind of like fucking Confucian linear style, okay? Is that fucking less racist? Motherfucker, I'm bad at fucking geometry, but when I fucking see it on the wrist, fucking, things rise to the surface. Well, anyway, this is exactly this was my kryptonite in a sense, because this is when it like really hit me. In fact, at that point, I was slipping deeper and deeper into the depression, and I was just kind of somewhat of a zombie drifting through life. And this really kind of connected with me. This really made me awake. And also, she had like profoundly like sad eyes. Kind of very world-weary sad eyes. On a young lady, it was really attractive to me. Like, I wouldn't even say sexy, because I didn't really have like some insane lust for her, but it was just kind of a soulmate kind of a thing, a kind of a force awoke in me. You see, like, because I was socially isolated, all my understanding of life came from Sex and the City. No, I'm just kidding.
You work all night painting?
Yeah, painting, sculpture, whatever.
All my understanding of life was very kind of abstract and kind of pure in a way. Like, I was really kind of a pure romantic. Like, I was disconnected from humanity. I was disconnected from the petty kind of squabbles and petty kind of rating systems and so on, and just kind of the everyday monotony of life. Everything was there. Like, I couldn't love her except to love her in a kind of a manic, insane way. And this is exactly what I started doing. And we started texting to each other back and forth. I never fucking texted before. I fucking hate texting. Look at my fucking arms, my hands, I mean. They're very large. Like, it's just, it's not comfortable for me to text. I don't fucking like doing it. Different nicknames began to emerge. She used to text me Meow, and then one day she misspelled it, so I started calling her Mew, Little Mew, Paw, Tiny Paw, and I'm sure there were others I forget by now. But the one she had for me was very fitting, and it was Rask, R-A-S-K, short for Raskolnikov. You see, like, this is what you get in Seattle, actually educated nicknames. Yeah, so this is the character in Crime and Punishment who kind of suffers bouts of melancholia and rage, etc. Just this bowl of energy, tragic energy, who then ends up stabbing a grandmother to death who was a moneylender. This was pretty close to the figure I presented. But the thing I think I really loved about her the most, aside from her sad eyes and geometric fucking self-harming patterns, was the fact that I couldn't place her. She was a perpetual enigma. And the reason she was a perpetual enigma is likely because she had her own mental health issues. Usually I can kind of classify a person, and that classification may not be 100%. It still sucks out the interest out of that person. They're just kind of in my box, even if that box is a lie and a delusion on my part. But with her, I couldn't quite place her. And it wasn't just because I was in love with her, though of course this played a big role, but it was just because she was just kind of, her rhythm wasn't normal. And in fact, her kind of treatment of me over time wasn't exactly super ethical either. Because for one thing, she kind of disappeared that one time, then reinitiated, then we were talking baby talk with each other while she was still with her boyfriend. And then it's just kind of this kind of stringing along continued. But I didn't really feel completely strung along, because for a person to string somebody along implies a certain kind of control that in fact she didn't have over her own life. I think her own life was pretty chaotic. I don't think it, I know it. She was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, which fit her pretty well. But the reason I'm saying this is that I'm not really bitter against her at all, because this avatar of her allowed me to feel this pure, crazy, insane love. This very ethereal nature of her, the very fact that she was so distant, allowed me to experience certain emotional, painful highs that I guess that I like. You know, some people slash their wrists. Some people fucking seem to slash their psyche and enjoy it. And this is what the opportunity she gave me. And I don't think she was a bad person or tried to use me in any kind of a way aside for like attention or some affection. I was just kind of a goofy kind of a loser who she liked to have orbit her planet in her chaotic universe. Like, I didn't think she meant me any ill harm, and basically think of her as a overall good person, even though her behavior on paper was kind of unethical, considering that fuck it, who fucking gives a shit. Here I'd like to briefly describe the depression I was experiencing at the time. This depression, once it developed, became a big part of my life. I don't know, it was there like 60% of the time with me or so, unless I was actually feeling normal or experiencing a bit of the old hypomania. I have a bias against talking about depression too much, because a lot of people experience it and there's really nothing new you could possibly say about it. The more conservative estimates of bipolar disorder and the way that at the intensity that I would have it would put it at like 1 to 2% of the population. Nevertheless, like 20% of people report having a depression throughout their life. So the numbers there are much higher now. I don't know what that 20% actually means as far as intensity, because it's just a broad word, depression. But anyway, descriptions of depression are littered with like cliches like feeling empty, which are true, but they're just that, they're cliches. And the other aspect of it is that depression is something where, by definition, nothing is happening outside. Brain processes inside of you create misery, but nothing is happening outside. And so I think that people have an empathy gap, an empathy sort of limit when it comes to people describing their misery that isn't correlated with the outside world. Now, this is unfair. Depression is horrible. It results in suicide, but that inclination is there. And I have to say, even for myself, it's there kind of as well. Like, I remember reading in this book about depression how one woman reported how painful it was to take a shower, what a miserable experience it was. And a part of me was like, kind of, at least, can you please at least acknowledge that this is not a rational thing to experience? And for that reason, I don't really want to dwell on it too much. But basically, here it is. The central feature of it was the central feature of this depression was hearing my fucking alarm on some piece of shit old watch that I thought I fucking disabled long ago. That was a big thing, and it would trigger a lot of pain in me. That aspect of the depression. The other aspect of the depression, the central aspect of it, would be a continuous sense of exhaustion. Now, I didn't like my job. I didn't like taking phone calls from unemployed people and opening claims for them over and over and over for the whole week. I wouldn't like it under the best of circumstances. But in this case, I was just feeling exhausted regardless. I always had this idea that I'm going to take this day off. I'm going to take this day off, recuperate, and, have a new energy, kind of restart my cycle or whatever, and just go on with my life. And so I would periodically take days off, sometimes almost every month. And of course, it didn't change anything. And aside from not being able to function well at work, I also kind of stagnated entirely in my outside life. I was feeling pretty tired and miserable, well, I shouldn't say miserable because that's a heavy word, but yeah, okay, whatever, fuck it. I was feeling pretty tired all the time, and I really kind of didn't pursue any social relationships. I had a co-worker who would always want me to go out to the bars with him to find me a girl, and I must say he found more girls than I did, even though he was kind of fixing up to be married. You see, I just kind of sat in the bar. I felt alienated from everybody, and I just wanted to be a remote observer of humanity I didn't feel connected to. I also got out of my apartment to walk around Seattle like a brain-dead zombie. Now, there are two kind of genres of music I enjoyed, and the first two concerts that I have attended in my life was Ice Cube and Leonard Cohen, and you can see the bipolarity in that. You can see the bipolarity. And Leonard Cohen was really, I don't even want to describe what Leonard Cohen means to me. I mean, he died in 2016, and I still kind of reflect on it much more so than I do on the death of some of my relatives. He really means a lot to me. I'm not a fanboy for a lot of people, but for Leonard Cohen. And continuously, whenever I felt depression, Leonard Cohen could articulate it way better than me, with a kind of a dark sense of humor and without kind of a heaviness and the cliches that many people used to employ to describe depression. He basically was the poet of melancholy, and he refined it into something that didn't feel, I don't know, he kind of connected it with life, I guess. He connected it with the flow of life, or something like that. And so I would wander around Seattle like a zombie listening to Leonard Cohen, waiting for the miracle to come. It was during one of these wanderings where I've decided to give this girl an ultimatum. After all, she was my salvation girl. I was looking to her to lift me out of it in this majestic romantic relationship we were gonna have in our dark fucking romance. I was waiting for her to lift me out of my misery, but instead what I received were periodic tender texts, to which I replied with tenderness, but it was more than little mysterious tender texts that I needed. It was more that I needed at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a squirrel, but you can't get it, I guess.
Oh. It just passed, I think.
Yeah.
Just take this longing from my tongue, all the lonely things my hands have done. Let me see your beauty broken down, like you would do for one you love.
And so I invited her to Ballard, where we met up, and I gave her an ultimatum: leave the boyfriend or we will cease communication. She was upset by this, and she left. Well, she certainly didn't concede to leave her boyfriend. Now, of course, the little bitch that I am, I buckled. I wrote her these huge fucking emails and letters. I mean, it was actually in the form of like these unending texts, like these strange proclamations and treaties that would fucking solve the Middle East crisis right now. It would fucking carve out the fucking East Jerusalem for fucking Palestine, these fucking texts and letters. And I think I left her multiple voicemails. A normal girl wouldn't respond to this and reignite things, but actually she did. And what she said is this: she said, this is gonna end in a murder-suicide. So, who says women aren't funny? Maybe you've watched that old Hitchens video on YouTube. Well, he's wrong, because every time I think back on it, it still gives me the chuckles. I never indicated any violence whatsoever. Presumably she wouldn't talk to me. If I did, though, maybe she would, but I didn't. But there was certainly that intensity there. Now I was wandering around like a zombie, listening to Leonard Cohen, experiencing my depression, but also in the midst of a heartbreak. So and so I had to look for something else, right? Alcohol didn't work. Salvation girl didn't save me. And now I was looking for the answers. And I randomly wandered into a Buddhist temple, which would now define all my manic fantasies, or most of them, for the duration of my life. So after I was a teenage Christian, an Orthodox Christian, After that, that religion was kind of replaced with psychoanalysis and the devotion to Papa Freud. However, Papa Freud kind of faded into the background, began so in college when I was kind of smelling some of that bullshit off of the Freudian theories. And at that point, I wasn't explicitly an atheist or an agnostic, but there was, of course, a kind of a fucking theism in me, an implicit theism interconnected with my manic narcissism. That is to say, the greatest evidence for the existence of some force was my clear destiny in the world, like the clear sense of meaning I felt in the world naturally had to have some sort of a maker behind it or something incoherent, but I wasn't like coherently religious. Now, of course, we can't possibly forget the mystical Cincinnati winds, the windstorm that blessed my entry into Seattle. But hey, did you know that once I arrived in Seattle, there was a record snowstorm, and after that, there was a kind of a profound heat wave, one of the highest fucking temperatures achieved in that city. Dude, coincidence? Coincidence? Well, anyway, I didn't have anything profoundly coherent there. And I wasn't interested in an organized religion, but went there in a state of kind of desperation. And once I entered the Buddhist world, I felt profoundly connected with it immediately. Now, I assume a lot of it has to do with just sheer desperation. Salvation Girl didn't work out for me. And now, I needed to enter a different realm of salvation. Now, ironically, like, Buddhism is not at all about salvation whatsoever. There is no savior. There is just kind of supposed to be really like this tedious or at least intense lifelong practice that in a religious context stretches through different lives. But I had a different vibe to myself, and I really kind of I wanted the answers. And when I was reading early kind of Buddhist books that I first started getting, I literally would like kiss them and hold them like, I don't know, like very tender things. Also, a big aspect of this is the fact that I genuinely to this day relate to Buddhist philosophies, and it was the best philosophy that I have ever encountered personally, as far as practicality and the connection with overall human existence. But I no longer ascribe to it an ability to solve all of my problems or any sort of a salvation. Nevertheless, at the very outset, Buddhism seemed to be working. I mean, I had a very neglected, a very dirty apartment that I actually cleaned, which was in and of itself a miracle. I would go to do some extra cleaning at the temple. Now, all things considered, this was amazing. And I definitely felt an overall uplift. However, it turned out that, in retrospect at least, that this was just because it was the beginning of the year. And I was feeling some hypomania. And I'm sure that being happy and excited about discovering Buddhism has played into this, but nevertheless, this unfortunately didn't last. However, at the time, I contacted my employer and I actually arranged to only work 3 days a week. Now, at that time, my spending wasn't great, and I could actually afford only working 3 days a week, so now I had more days off than I had working, and I presumably no longer needed to take days off to catch up on rest. And at this point, I have experienced the greatest period of hypomania that I have experienced before. Because before, you see, like in college, my hypomania wasn't really disciplined. It was just all over the place. It was connected with the self, connected with the ego. It didn't have a bigger template. And I think that one of the reasons why hyper-religiosity is such a big symptom in bipolar disorder is because religion is the only kind of playing field, the only realm, socially acceptable realm of human life that has this kind of a grandiose, infinite span. It really has an aesthetic where the insane can roam. It welcomes them in a sense with its ideas. And this is why people like me go into it. And it's kind of a well-known fact that a lot of kind of mentally ill people are attracted to Buddhism specifically. Like, I've literally heard it from people who go to Buddhist centers. And then when I spoke to these people, it turned out that they themselves had hallucinations. Well, yeah, I mean, I've really spoken to some really kind of people with mental issues at these Buddhist centers. And now I was one of them and enjoying the feast. Even though at the beginning of my Buddhist career, I haven't yet developed the full-scale mania, I was not yet Agvan Dorjev. Nevertheless, there was already some crazy building up in there. One of the things is that I used to stare intently at the Buddhist teacher, like just kind of fixate my stare on them, waiting for something, waiting for some mystical transmission. And when you stare at something for a long period of time, it starts to blend with the environment. And the environment behind them is, of course, a big statue of the Buddha. So I was just kind of zoning out there. And I remember one of these Buddhist teachers saying that when you achieve a high status of realization, then you'll know it because you'll hear the Dharma, you'll hear the teachings in the wind, in the rifling of leaves. And as I left the temple, man, guess what? I was hearing the Dharma in the leaves. And actually, this is a mainstream kind of religious Buddhist belief that if you came to Buddhism, that there's a good possibility, and it's almost a certainty that you were connected to Buddhism in your past lives, and you were connected with the specific teachers and the specific people there in the Sangha, in the Buddhist community. You were connected with them in the past life. I certainly believe that. And I believed almost everything about the religion right away, which was pretty unusual, considering that I didn't follow any organized religion since I was in my early teens. And I really latched on to this idea, and I really felt that I was, in a sense, stepping into the old river, stepping into the familiar terrain. And I was really happy with this discovery/rediscovery. And if you don't know, Seattle, for me at least, is one of the most beautiful places on earth, because it has multiple bodies of water around it, and there are also kind of dramatic hills. And it's just this combination of this dramatic nature and human habitation that creates a kind of, for me at least, a very mystical feeling to the whole place, with the gentle rains and the fog. And now I was wandering around this beautiful city, wandering around these neighborhoods that look like something out of the Shire, wandering around the beautiful parks, and really kind of getting high on these Buddhist ideas. The thing is that back in my college days, even though I've experienced more hypomania, it was all kind of focused around the self. And now, on the one hand, the borders of the possible were vastly expanded, but the ego was, in a sense, also constrained. And so my hypomania, my expansion into the world, was more universal and more subtle, less crude, less sort of about me directing the next Batman or becoming the mayor of Seattle or whatever, and more about just, I don't know, just kind of my place in the universe. As I was wandering around Seattle, I really kind of felt like at the outset of some mysterious movie, at the outset that I was a character entering some enchanted forest. But in a sense, like in this case, the forest was bigger than me, or at least as big as me. It was really kind of a sublime high that, unfortunately, I can't properly describe. I mean, it was just a kind of a connection with the universe, a rediscovery of life and death, a sense of kind of a revelation, and also familiarity. And I especially remember one moment when I was in this really cool park with great vistas in Seattle, and I was listening to this series of audio lectures about Buddhism. And this specific academic also had a hard-on for this Tibetan mysticism. And he described this mantra that was supposed to cause rain, a kind of this magical spell. And he said that one time he recited it indoors and the fire alarm went off, or at least the sprinkler system, so it kind of worked in this sense. And then he recited it, and right at that time, like, rain started around me. Now, a fucking drizzle in Seattle is not such an anomalous event, but for me, of course, it was just another aspect of this. And I mean, I can't, and like I said before, I just don't have the words to describe it. But it was just a total interconnection, a total kind of sense of expanding inner peace. It was one of those moments in life where it was really awesome, fucking awesome to be bipolar. But unfortunately, naturally, it had to end. And I collapsed back into depression. And so seemingly I had everything going for me, well, at least relatively speaking. I had a lot of time off of work that I could use to put together some sort of a social life, look for another job, re-examine whether I wanted maybe more education, or at least spend it in some sort of a bohemian splendor or something. But none of this happened, of course. I was just fucking depressed again. I was once again being zombified. The fucking octopus in my brain was withdrawing its magic and starting to suck on my soul again. So the things I have tried so far didn't work. Alcohol didn't work, the Salvation Girl didn't work, and now I was coming to a sad realization that Buddhism wasn't going to offer me some sort of a magic instant salvation. And so I reverted to medicine, and this set me on the course to total disaster. At first I was going to a therapist. This therapist was actually a great guy. I really wish I had somebody like him right now. He had a place, for some reason this company, this medical provider, had really like a really nice building with great views of the Space Needle. And I mean, I literally ascended there, and he had fucking, floor to ceiling window through which I looked at the Space Needle. It was fucking awesome. That in and of itself was therapeutic. And he was really like a nice, empathetic guy, and we had a connection, but unfortunately the therapeutic effect didn't last longer than the end of the day, if that. And yet that summer, I wasn't purely relying on psychotherapy to solve my problems. I had something up my own crazy sleeve. I had my own solutions. And I had this specifically strange and intense hypomanic episode. So everything began with a kind of a fixation on freedom. And I wanted to use Buddhism to just break through. I wasn't going to meditate forever. I was just going to have this conceptual breakthrough, a sudden kind of crash through the false reality. In order to do that, of course, I began by staring at my hand. So I would stare at my hand during my commute to work, when I was riding in a bus, looking around at my hand and trying to understand the emptiness of inherent existence, trying to sort of see things for how they really are. Okay, so this was the first step, but then I had to go further. I had to break through the fear and a kind of a social awkwardness that I had, because somehow the social awkwardness and timidity prevented me from achieving Buddhist realizations. So there were clear ways of doing that. Now, in order to do that, of course, what I needed to do was go to downtown Seattle and just dance around there. Now, I didn't dance too much during the daytime. I mean, I unfortunately haven't conquered my fear to that point. I would do a few skips here and there. It was difficult to break through that social timidity. I would also walk around and like smile and give the thumbs up to random people, different businessmen and yuppies. I'd do the old kind of snappy fingers to people on the street there in downtown Seattle. One guy, snapped his fingers back, and I was doing that thing. But unfortunately, not all of it was kind of harmless and goofy what I did. Because as I boarded the bus back home from downtown Seattle after a day of these festivities, there was a girl sitting across from me, and I started staring at her. Now, I don't justify doing this. This is the most kind of unfortunate thing I've done, the creepiest thing I've done, but I do regret it. But I just, it's hard for me to regret it too much, in a sense that I wasn't like in a normal state of mind when I started doing this. There wasn't like a logical chain of decision making, or a chain of decision making that I can reconstruct, when I started doing it. But it was also had to do with, breaking through fear. It was about this destruction of barriers somehow. And so I started staring at her, and she started looking at me. Okay, and the bus took off, and this continued for like 15 minutes or so. I don't know, like we were just staring at each other. Now, in her mind, I assume she was kind of doing her fearless kind of, defiance to this kind of predator, this kind of a feminist fucking defiance, like, fuck you. But instead, whereas I derived no like sexual gratification from this very creepy, horrible behavior, I derived nothing from it. In fact, I was still aiming to break through these social barriers, through this kind of timidity and through the false reality. This is what I was doing on my end of this stare down. So eventually she obviously left the bus, at some point. And at that point I was like, I asked myself, what the fuck was that about? What was it about? And again, I regret it. This is the only thing I've done like that ever in my life. And ladies, this is why I always tell ladies, a lot of dangerous creeps out there on public transportation. So please be careful. At this point, because of my continuous sense of exhaustion and dread, I was even contemplating taking days off, even though I was only working 3 days a week. I just needed that time to restart, and I probably did take some days off at that time. And so it was clearly unacceptable to me to be in this perpetual state of partial paralysis, and I wanted more. I wanted psychiatry. I wanted a fucking antidepressant. And my therapist, like a lot of therapists are, were reluctant to send me to an actual psychiatrist. There is a lot of distrust between these categories of mental health providers. But eventually he ascended to it. And I went up to this other guy. This psychiatrist was a pretty nice guy as well. We really kind of had good communications, and I just told him about about my need for freedom. I was on the search for freedom, and I needed to kind of figure myself out. And we talked about my friend Kaylin, who I met on the streets of Seattle, who's this borderline homeless puppet performer, a nihilistic puppeteer. We talked about him. We talked about my quest for freedom. Some of the things we didn't talk about was like how magical winds carried me to Seattle, how I wanted to be the mayor of Seattle, how I saw an apparition or something like that, sensed an apparition of Mother Nature in my bedroom during college. Those things somehow didn't come up because I didn't talk about mania. In fact, I presented myself as in the midst of this existential kind of a guy who kind of overthinks and is kind of lost in the world and maybe is prone to depression and just needs a lift. That's probably how he viewed me. Now, I don't exactly begrudge him not checking whether I was bipolar. Nevertheless, it might have been a nice thing to do, because I really, by that time, had a history of having depression, and it seems like it's something that could have been checked out. And in fact, I don't remember any inquiries whatsoever in that direction at all, even in the direction of whether I had depression before. I just don't remember it. But eventually, finally, I got my antidepressant. I got my hands on venlafaxine. Along with lithium, venlafaxine was to play a huge role in my life. Unfortunately, not as an antidepressant. Actually, when I started taking it, I felt a little bump in mood, but that was likely a placebo effect. It shortly leveled out. This was the end of the year, so I had my lift at the beginning of the year, and now toward the end of the year I was feeling pretty bad. In fact, I was preoccupied with this idea of merging my Buddhist beliefs with my unhinged love for the Seattle girl. This was a big idea kind of I had throughout the year, along with the notion of freedom. Freedom, I was preoccupied with this idea of what is freedom? Is it bourgeois life, or is it the path of Henry Miller, who I was like reading religiously at that point? In Buddhism, there is this idea of taking one person you feel affection toward, and in traditional societies this was the mother, taking that affection, that love for her, and spreading it out toward all sentient beings, toward all living beings, kind of magnifying this attachment and love and spreading it all around, therefore disabling this clinginess, all the while expanding your empathy and compassion, and therefore bringing yourself closer to enlightenment and opening up potential opportunities in the future to guide others toward enlightenment. That's a key kind of aspect of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, I of course was trying to do it with a Seattle girl. This was a big experiment that I would undertake throughout my life with her, at least in my head. I mean, she didn't have any idea what the fuck I was doing. But it was just, this love felt so pure and powerful that surely I could kind of love the world through her without being attached and clinging toward her, right? Because without actually being with her. So, I mean, she didn't know what was going on. We were just, to the extent we were communicating, it was just a few texts. Like, she would text me something like, oh, you know, I was getting this tattoo and it hurt, and I was like, oh, well, whatever, I hope it gets better, or some shit you text. So this was my big preoccupation. And yet I was also kind of betting on venlafaxine at the same time. You can't just put all your eggs in the empathy Mahayana basket. You also want to put in the psychiatry basket. But nothing was really happening. And so the end of the year happened. I was still very depressed. And then it was naturally, dude, it was the beginning of the next year. Did you see this turn in the narrative? And here things get a little bit foggy, because I think my mind was already not quite functioning very well, and I kind of have a hard time remembering the specific chain of events that would bring me toward a manic fucking disaster, a complete fucking disaster. But at some point I quit my job. Now, it could be that I was just so depressed and no longer was able to work, or I have a theory that I was depressed and yet there was a little bit spark of mania born there that made me undertake this irresponsible decision. However, when I quit my job, I also no longer had health insurance, and so I stopped taking venlafaxine at some point without being dozed off of it. And at this point, this was the beginning. This was the beginning of the end of my life in Seattle. Is it on? If you take your time and you really look deeply in your life, then you see that a lot of the issues you're having are related to cyclical thinking. You have the same problems that you wake up with every morning and that you go to bed with every night. They tuck you in, and sometimes they even appear in your sleep. And regardless of whether you're living in the Soviet Union, Communist China, or in Moscow, Idaho, you're still going to have the same issues as they relate to your psychology. And we can even forget about America and Russia, and we can look at any country in the world, whether it's India, Tibet, Vietnam, Cambodia, South Africa. You're going to have those same issues afflicting the same people. Those issues are really universal. And the question and the fundamental problem from a Buddhist point of view is that we seek our pleasure, we seek our fulfillment and happiness in the external world. We don't look internally. We don't look at the machine that creates attachment. We don't look at the machine that creates desire. We don't look at the machine that creates suffering. And that machine is our mind. And from a Buddhist point of view, since beginningless time, we have been preoccupied with searching for external pleasure. And we've always imagined it as the most glorious thing, but we never actually received it. we're kind of always reaching out for something, always extending our hand towards something, but we're never actually have anything in our grasp. We're in perpetual motion of reaching out.